I'd like to introduce U.S. Senator Kelly Ayotte. Senator Ayotte would have loved to have been here today, but her schedule conflicts prevented her from being able to be a part of this great day, so she instead wanted to say good morning through video message.
Hello, and thank you for allowing me to share a few words with you today. I'd like to thank Business New Hampshire Magazine, the New Hampshire Forum on the Future, the New Hampshire Department of Education, and the New Hampshire Coalition for Business and Education for hosting this important discussion. I'd also like to recognize everyone who sponsored this event, including the Endowment for Health and the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. Investing in our youth today is key to their success tomorrow. The speakers you'll hear from throughout the course of this day will share valuable insights and perspectives on how to transform our workforce by focusing on early learning. As the mother of 2 kids, I am excited for the promise that the future holds for them. And I want to make sure that all of our children have access to quality education that prepares them for good jobs right here in New Hampshire. This summer, the Senate passed a bipartisan education reform bill that updates the outdated No Child Left Behind law. During the debate on this bill, I was pleased to work across the aisle on a number of amendments aimed at better preparing students for the workforce. Promoting education initiatives and job training in the areas of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or STEM fields, is critical to ensuring that we stay on the cutting edge of innovation and that we have a robust workforce that excels in these disciplines. Over the last few years, in an effort to increase students' proficiency and close the education gap between the United States and other countries, the U.S. has seen an increased and renewed focus on STEM education. Boosting the number of women who pursue careers in these areas is an important part of our nation's economic future, and it all starts with a strong foundation in the STEM disciplines. That's one reason why I worked with Senator Gillibrand on a measure to broaden student access to mentorship, tutoring, and after-school activities to encourage interest and develop STEM skills. In particular, the amendment will encourage states to explore ways to increase participation in STEM programs by underrepresented groups, including girls, minority students, English learners, students with disabilities, and low-income students. In another effort to help meet New Hampshire's workforce needs, I work with some of my Democratic colleagues on an amendment to ensure that career and technical education is considered a core academic subject in schools. I'm also working on bipartisan legislation in the Senate that would bring together schools, businesses, and local communities to develop job training and education programs that better fit local workforce needs. Common sense measures like these will help to prepare our students for a better future and foster their innovative spirit. We should be doing everything we can to encourage New Hampshire students who are the leaders and problem solvers of tomorrow. Today, you'll have the opportunity to talk about additional ways we can help our young people succeed and also strengthen our workforce. And I look forward to continuing to partner with you in that effort. Thank you again, and to enjoy and have a great conference.
Thank you, Senator. To start off our list of speakers this morning, it's my honor to introduce the Commissioner of the New Hampshire Department of Education, Dr. Virginia Berry.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone, and it's really amazing to see everyone here today. I'm especially excited because I've seen people here today who have been working almost their entire career to support young children in our state. Teachers, superintendents, policymakers, Mary Jane Wallner, who I've known for whatever seems a lifetime. It's really a great day. I think New Hampshire's been in this place several times during my professional career in New Hampshire. We talk and we talk about how important children are, and yet we never really quite made it to that level where all of the people in this room today, whether it's businesses, policymakers, teachers, educators, parents, and members of several foundations, have finally come together to say children really do count. It is really an amazing day, and my hope would be, as we move forward, to continue to create a pre-K through 20 seamless system. I believe in our work in the New Hampshire Department of Education, we are all coming together. I'm pleased to see our early childhood providers, our elementary, our high school, middle schools, and colleges come together to say, we can make a difference in the lives of children, and children are important to the economic development and health of our state. So let's just keep this going, because I think this time we will make it to the top of the summit. I'm really pleased today to introduce Dr. Patricia Kuhl as one of our guest speakers. I think it's particularly interesting, Pat told me right before we started, that in 1997 she spoke at the White House when Hillary Clinton was the First Lady. And in 1997, she did talk yet again about the importance of brain development in young children and how critical they are to every nation. Dr. Kuhl is the Bezo Family Foundation Endowed Chair for Early Childhood Learning, co-director of the University of Washington Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences, director of the Science of Learning Center, and professor of Speech and Hearing Sciences. And believe it or not, I'm leaving a whole lot out of here because her bio is so thick that I just wouldn't be able to have the morning go as planned. She is internationally recognized for her research on early language and brain development, and her studies show that young children learn, and they learn very early. Dr. Kuhl is the 2015 recipient of the prestigious George A. Miller Prize in Cognitive Neuroscience, and her TED Talk has received just under 2 million views. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Kuhl, Dr. Patricia Kuhl, to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. That's my kindergarten Catholic school uniform. Brings back good memories. Good morning, New Hampshire. I hope you're ready to learn something about the baby brain and the baby's potential. What we've learned from neuroscience over the past 10 years is that the brain of a baby has to be built. All of the areas are there in the brain to an amazing degree, but the connections and the wiring and the functionality of the brain, as it will become over the next couple of years, is not there to begin with. And so the tools of modern neuroscience are demonstrating in a way that's absolutely shocking what's going on up there as a child is learning, as the child is listening or seeing or experiencing an emotion. So for the first time, a baby can be in an MEG machine, and I'll show you that later, and we get movies of what's going on as the baby is doing something. In addition to brain function, we're looking at brain structure. I'll show you pictures. We're seeing here about 150 color-coded areas in the baby brain. We can examine each and every one and see how those areas develop as a function of the child's experience. And the bushy connections, the wiring that allows those areas of the brain to talk to one another that are developed early in childhood. We're doing this to the point that the science is now producing interventions. We now know how to connect the dots between the crib behavior of a baby and early reading 5 years later. So the science is producing an amazing set of findings that we can guide our work to assist children to become all that they can become. So let's start with some simple facts. This is the data showing the size of the brain from birth to adulthood. Now, if you were in control of all of the resources, you were in control of Congress, good luck. But if you were, and you saw these data, when would you want to invest in children? You can see that by 5 years of age, the brain is 92% of its total size. By 1 year of age, 70% of its total size. This is the time when the architecture of the brain is getting formulated, and that architecture sets babies up for very, very complicated things later. The amazing thing from neuroscience is that it starts right in the beginning. Many of you have seen the idea that the connections between neurons, so all of your neurons, the trillions, 80 million neurons are there to begin with. But the synapses, the wiring between them is not there to begin with. You see on the left what it looks like at birth, and then at 3 years of age, and then at 14 years of age. And you see this change from a proliferation of synapses happening at the rate of 700 per second early in development. And then at the age of 3, with 3 times more synapses than you and I have, they're systematically pruned depending upon the experience of the child. That pruning is good. Parents who say to me, I don't want my baby's brain to prune. You say, no, no, the pruning is good. The pruning is good. Pruning produces expertise. But that's the notion of the construction that's going on in that early period proliferation and then systematic pruning to strengthen the remaining connections to formulate a brain that is ready for the future. So you see this curve from birth, 3 years old, and then into puberty. Compare that to this one, which is a graph showing the critical period, the window of opportunity for second language learning. Now find your age at the bottom, and then find your skill level on the vertical axis, okay? All right, so the babies and children are geniuses up to the age of 7. They will absorb a second language. But as you move from age 7, every 2 years, there's a systematic decline in the automaticity of your learning. Babies are like sponges with regard to how they acquire language, and we've learned a lot about it. You and I might learn a second language after that puberty period, but we won't do it to the same degree, to the same level of expertise. You won't, it won't become automatic for you. So, but this is a big lesson in this graph, demonstrating that you don't learn things at the same rate over your age. There are special times in development. There's a window of opportunity when the brain is ready for environmental information. And it's that time when if you provide that information to the child, to the growing, developing brain, that magic happens. So we've been studying this magic. It's very important to understand what's happening. Why are the babies so much better than we are? Why can you take your child to France and they're absorbing information at the age of 2 and 3, and you're standing alongside them, but you're not absorbing to the same degree at all? What's happening in their brains? What's the magic that they're putting to work, and how can we capitalize on it? We started studying maybe 20 years ago using behavioral measures, and I'll show you the brain results in a minute. But behaviorally, we'd been doing tests all over the world. I had 8 laboratories all over the world testing infants on the sounds of different languages. In order to learn words, they have to know which sounds are being used in this culture to distinguish words. So we tested babies by having them sit on their parents' lap, and we trained them to turn their heads to the left to the loudspeaker when the sound changed. So let's watch a baby in that task.
Can a baby as young as 6 months old hear the difference between 2 vowels? This baby is trained to look for the toy when the sound changes. She's being distracted, so she'll turn only when she hears the difference in sounds. The key question, will she turn before the toy lights up?
E, 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 E.
Okay, she's a genius and she knows it, right? Okay, so this same baby, tested at 12 months of age, can no longer perform in this way for any sound that doesn't belong to the language she's been listening to. So at 6 months of age, the babies are citizens of the world. All the sounds of all languages, they will behave in exactly this same way. The parents, of course, are not citizens of the world. They're culture-bound listeners. And parents will not be able to do this task for any sounds that are not in languages they were exposed to in the first 7 years. So you've got this child born ready for any language. And then during that period between 6 and 12 months, and we've actually narrowed it to 8 to 10 months, something very special is going on in the baby brain. And what's going on are 2 very distinct things. The first thing the infant's doing is listening to us intently and using that computer-like brain to calculate the statistics of incoming language. They take statistics as they listen to us talk. And what are we doing? We're speaking motherese and parentese. How many of you have heard motherese or the phrase parentese? Right. Okay, so I'm talking to you in my adult voice, but if I had a 2-monther in front of me, I would be saying, hello, how are you? Can you open those big blue eyes? Okay, not your job interview voice, but a very, very entertaining signal for infants. They will select to listen to it whenever you get the opportunity. So that signal is ideal for babies to take statistics, and they are indeed. Studies all over the country are showing that babies' brains act like a computer to listen to us and pay attention to the high-frequency items. So they are statistical machines in a sense. But there's a second feature that's extremely important, demonstrated in experiments where we exposed 9-month-old babies, monolingual Seattle babies, who had never heard a second language, to Mandarin or Spanish. And we gave them 12 sessions over a month's time and asked, what did we do to the brain when we exposed the babies to that brand new language? And the answer was, if they heard the language live from native speakers in my lab from those foreign countries, they learned so well they were equal to the babies in Taiwan in the case of Mandarin. They were equal to the babies in Spain in the case of Spanish. 12 sessions over a month's time at the perfect time in development, and the babies absorbed the information, but only in the presence of a human being. In the live condition, they learned perfectly. In the TV condition, beautiful DVDs that the kids stared at and touched the screen and you thought they were learning, nothing happened. Brain tests and behavioral tests following the 12 sessions in that video exposed and an audio exposed group, no learning whatsoever, whereas the babies in the live setting, magic. Magic was happening. So there's something about the social context, and you're going to hear about that from a number of speakers. That social human being in front of our children is absolutely critical. There are very special things going on in the brain when we're face to face, not only with our babies, but with each other. Brains are meant to learn from other human beings. So this presents itself something interesting and a problem, a social justice problem. So if babies need to hear language, and they need to be face to face, and they need to absorb it in the way that I'm describing, it's magic to the brain, what happens if they don't get that? What happens if they grow up in a family in which there's not a lot of talk, not a lot of engagement? Well, you've heard about the 30 million word gap, and we show on this slide the differences by age 4 in the number of words that professional families and working class families and welfare families present to their infants. So this is just focused on the raw number. What we've been seeing in the laboratory is something more akin to the quality of engagement that parents provide for their infants. On the left is the Parentees speech graph. On the right is the standard speech graph. We're plotting the words produced at 24 months for children whose Parentees percent, the prevalence of Parentees in their homes by adults on the left. The higher the prevalence of Parentees at 11 months, look at word growth. That curve is like this. Straight up. The more Parentees, the more engagement face to face that children experience, the words produced zoom up, regardless of socioeconomic status. And on the right, you see that standard speech, what I'm using, is flat or slightly negative. There's no significant effect. Parents need to know this. This is a key to that developmental growth of language. And if you do studies at the age of 5, if you wait till children are 5, and you take measures of an area of the brain, Broca's area, you can see it lit up here on the right, the relationship between, we had taken IQ measures, social engagement measures, cognitive and linguistic measures on the children. None of those features predicted Broca's area's activation as much as the socioeconomic status of the family. So how do you interpret that fact? Well, socioeconomic status of the family is a proxy for opportunities to learn. Children, before the age of 5, need opportunities to learn. If they're not there, the brain can't do its work. It can't wire those circuits. The architecture doesn't form to the same degree, and you get these kinds of results. Well, now we can go even further. We have a $2.5 million machine, magnetoencephalography, the only one of its kind in the world that allows you to put a person of any age in a totally safe, non-invasive, totally silent machine and see movies of what's going on as that brain is working. We were the first in the world to put a 6-month-old baby in an MEG machine. And you can see she's totally comfortable. She's got insert earphones. She's listening to the words and sounds of many different languages. We're tracking her little head with a kind of GPS device, so no matter what she's doing, and she can move around and play with toys, we know exactly where her brain is, every structure in the brain. Of course, we're interested in specific structures in the brain. So what's going on up there? What do we see? Well, have a look. Here's a 12-monther, and we're going to show you the activity in the brain in response to a word. So here's a 12-monther. I've highlighted 150 areas. We can actually see 1,000, but here's 150 areas. Focused on the auditory, 2 auditory areas, because this is sound, and 2 areas related to social engagement and language and literacy, Broca's, and the big connection that allows these 2 areas to talk to each other. The red bubbles are activity of firing in the brain. What you see is 1 expected result and 1 surprise. On the right, the auditory area is firing like crazy as the baby's listening. But look at Broca's area. Broca's area fires also at exactly the same time. Why? Because that baby's trying to talk back. That baby's rehearsing. What do I have to do to join this conversation? These are 7 and 11-month-old babies tested in this experiment. At 7 months, the baby's brain is responding. Every time you talk to that baby, that brain wants to get in the conversation. Why do we talk to children before they can talk back? To give them practice at doing it, to give them the desire to affect the world by speaking their own words. We've now shown, not only in these movies of function, the beautiful connectivity that's growing in the brain, measured with diffusion tensor imaging, DTI. This is a 12-monther's connectivity. Look at that brain. Talk about a wiring diagram, right? This is what is allowing these infants to do such sophisticated stuff. And we can connect these connections. I can tell you, we can identify specific ones important for certain abilities. Here's executive function, the relationship at the age of 5 between executive function, which allows you to direct your attention, inhibit your responses, to sort of pay attention when you're supposed to. There's an area, that red pathway that you see there on the left, is correlated very strongly to the behavioral measures in the questionnaire at the age of 5. So the more executive function these children show at 5, that brain area is stronger. We have another example in which we can show another pathway in the brain, the arcuate I showed you connecting auditory to Broca's, the arcuate fasciculus. Jason Yateman in our laboratory is demonstrating that this pathway, when measured prior to reading, can predict when a child is ready to read. That child is ready to read when the pathway is not totally formed, not started, but just beginning to formulate. When the brain is formulating its pathway and language instruction hits that circuitry, magic happens. Not all children are ready to read at the same time. These kinds of measures will give us a kind of personalized neuroscience. We talk about personalized medicine. We will be talking about the personalized neuroscience of learning as we move forward in the next 10 years. I want to mention how important bilingual learning is for the child's brain. We in this country are afraid of bilingualism. We've been afraid for a long time. But the rest of the world is highly bilingual. And I want to show you, our data are showing that the bilingual babies exposed to both languages are perfectly fine. They're learning words and sounds and doing everything right on schedule. What things that people don't know is how cognitively flexible those babies are. So cognitive flexibility means when someone gives you a new problem, you're really good at inventing the solution. Doesn't mean that you're smarter, but it means that you're inventive. You're a problem solver. So we've been studying children growing up in families. Actually, this work was done in Texas with a group of Head Start families. We were interested in the kids and their brain development because they were bathed in bilingual experience, but also the moms, because this is a 19-year-old Head Start mom, teenager, lovely woman. This is her 4th child. And we were interested in how much we could teach her about her baby's brain and her engagement in that process. And the answer to this experiment was wonderful data on the children, but the mothers were changing as much as the baby's brains as we told them the power of their involvement in their children's learning. Well, let me show you the studies that we've done. This is a test of executive function for an 11-monther, right? We have a plexiglass box. We hide a toy. The baby gets used to, there's only one door open on this box. Baby gets used to getting the toy. Then we change the rules, reverse the box, and see if they can invent the solution. Let's watch this monolingual baby try to solve the problem. There's the toy in the box. All right, so they all push the box, like maybe it'll pop out if I push it. Okay, so she works pretty hard and she gets that toy, and that's very exciting to these little kids. But now let's change the rules, turn the box around, and put it in the other side. So now the door is open on the other side, and she, like we all do, use the solution that used to work, all right? But what she needs to do is find a way to get to the other side, and she doesn't do it. She doesn't solve it. Watch this bilingual baby do the same task. The toy goes in, she pushes, but she finds it. Yeah, she wants that toy. She actually doesn't want to give it up, but we get it back, put it in the other side. All right, so she's also going to look to the old side briefly and then work really hard to get it out of the box on the other side. Okay, the statistical result is that bilingual children, babies, and even adults are much, much better at cognitive flexibility. It's good for your brain, too. Less Alzheimer's in bilingual people and slower cognitive aging. Bilingualism is good for our children. All right, so I'm going to finish with the idea that the science has progressed to interventions, and I will only describe one. We're working on producing bilingual babies in Madrid, where all of the children are enrolled in nursery schools from the age of 4 months. We're also working on the design of an early language and literacy intervention for low-income families. As I said, we can now connect the dots. We know what parents need to do to bring about that phenomenon of excellent language and literacy in the children. And the last one is a music intervention, a study that we finished, and I want to show you a bit about that one. It's interesting because it's not only a fun experiment, it taught us something profound about the brain. Okay, we were exposing babies in 12 sessions in the experimental group, and there's a control group. They listened to songs that are the waltz, the bump, 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 bump of a waltz. And it's in a social environment with other babies, 12 sessions over a month's time, again at 9 months, at that very, very sensitive period for auditory stuff, brain tests after exposure, and we watch development until 30 months of age. Here's what the exposure sessions look like.
Me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd.
Okay, so what did 12 sessions of listening to waltz music and acting do to the baby brain? Well, the expected was sharper responses in the experimental as opposed to the control group in the auditory cortex. You present that rhythm and a violation of that rhythm, and the brain goes, oh, I know that wasn't right, the active brain. But not only that, prefrontal cortex, where babies are training their brains to attend, lit up in these children. We trained these children, we think, in pattern perception. They got to expect an auditory pattern. When it was violated, their prefrontal cortex, the executive function part of the brain, was very, very active. We thought, well, if this is a general phenomenon, it ought to work for something other than music. Sure enough, when we tested them with speech, a speech rhythm, uncommon, doesn't exist in English, it's Japanese. These babies were significantly better, not only in auditory cortex, but in prefrontal cortex. So what's the message here? The message here is that brains are ready for experience. They're ready for experience in social environments that they can act on. Their brains get wired based on these experiences, not only in sensory cortex, but in prefrontal cortex that they need to direct their attention to the things that are interesting in the world. What we have to mention is that if a world is unpredictable, if there's toxic stress in the home, not only is brain development not going as it should, they learn that there are no predictable patterns in their world. Pattern perception doesn't develop. Expectancies are that there's chaos in my world. We need to provide information for a world to design non-chaotic environments for our infants, babies, and children, to prepare them to be everything that they can be. Thank you so much for your attention.
It is my pleasure and honor to introduce a very good friend of mine and a gentleman who is in charge of the New Hampshire College and Community Council, but he's University Council, I'm sorry, but he's also in today's role playing the spokesperson on the New Hampshire Forum for the Future. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Tom Horrigan.
Thank you. Thanks. Good morning, everyone.
The New Hampshire Forum on the Future is delighted to be a co-host of Transforming Tomorrow's Workforce today. Preparing early learners for a 21st century world is undoubtedly our most important challenge. At the Forum on the Future, Fred Coker and I strive to shine a bright spotlight on the emerging trends, issues, and challenges confronting New Hampshire. Today's conference offers all of us an important opportunity to reflect on where we are as a state relative to preparing tomorrow's workforce, and equally important in preparing tomorrow's citizens. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Kathy Hirsch-Payshek. Several of the planners of today's event heard her speak at Harvard last December, and they said, we have to have people in New Hampshire hear this. And so today, now you can. Dr. Hirsch-Payshek is a professor and the Stanley and Deborah Lifowitz Faculty Fellow in the Department of Psychology at Temple University, where she directs the Infant Language Laboratory. Among many other accomplishments and accolades, she is a fellow at the Brookings Institution. Please welcome to New Hampshire Dr. Hirsch-Payshek.
Hello, New Hampshire. It is so wonderful to be here. And I want to thank you so much for including me in this very exciting forum, and also to tell you how excited I am to get a chance to be with Pat Cool today. Isn't she amazing? Come on, guys. So I fear you are going to hear some of the same messages, but that's great because we know that the brain works better when it continues to hear the same messages over and over. Anyway, today I'm going to talk to you about becoming brilliant. There are a lot of off-cited facts that you've heard many times before. America is falling behind in the international rankings. We're 17th in reading behind Finland, Poland, Japan. 30th in math, a full 13 slots behind Slovenia, and 23rd in science. It's projected that 50% of our inner city students aren't going to graduate from high school. The 21st Century Partnership, a group of 500 CEOs who were surveyed, said our graduates are not prepared for the workforce. The military suggests our educational status is now a national security problem. And Newsweek decries that we have a creativity crisis. We're not training our students for the jobs of tomorrow. Less recognized as we spout all of these facts is that the 15-year-olds and 20-year-olds who we're talking about start out as little people, and that we really need to look at what's going on with those little people. Well, now we know. The science is telling us that by age 3, we are already seeing huge gaps. You just saw in Pat's slide about the 30 million word gap. You probably heard about that one before. But it turns out that that 30 million word gap also has a lot to do with the language scores and the literacy scores of 9 and 10-year-olds all the way up. There's also a gap in spatial skills that we just discovered in our lab in the last couple of years. It turns out that when we ask young children to copy a design like this, a simple Lego design, that they're great if it's just 2 blocks. If it's 3 blocks, they're okay. But once you start rotating things, the young children from low-income homes don't do as well as the kids from middle and upper-income homes. So they're not as good in spatial scores, and you may say, well, why does that matter at age 3? Because that data at age 3 predicts their readiness in STEM at age 5. So we need to do something about it. It may be as important as the language gap. We're already hearing that in pre-K, numeracy is behind. Their math knowledge in kindergarten is going to predict their math achievement all the way through elementary school, so these gaps actually matter. And we need to do something about it. You can see it on the graphs to the side. The white, that represents the low-income kids. And the black, that represents the middle and upper income kids. So what is a nation to do? How do we remedy the inequities and help every single child become brilliant? Because as Pat's just told you, they all start out that way. It's our job to keep the brilliance going. Now, one answer to this question has been education reform now. And it is important that we all strive to have high-quality education. And we know what happens when we just try to warehouse children and the education is not high quality. In fact, many of us heard the finding that came out this weekend, suggesting that in the Tennessee study, they didn't hold on to some of those gains. And knowing from the op-ed and the science around it that maybe it's because there wasn't a real plan for high quality in the state. And so it's not looking like it does in Boston and New Jersey when you've really thought it out. But even if we have high-quality preschool, and I think putting together what you just heard from Pat and what you'll hear from me, by preschool, you're already a little bit late. We really have to think about what's happening with low-income children, in fact, with all children from 0 to 3, especially when we look at the brain architecture that you just heard about. Furthermore, and Pat and her husband Andy tell us that when a child is in full-time preschool, it only occupies 20%, roughly 20% of their waking time. So I keep asking, what are we doing with the other 80%? Because we have to think about that if we're really going to help all kids succeed and help all kids become school-ready. Learning happens early. And I want to give you an example, again, borrowing from the science of what happens in language acquisition. Why do we keep harping on language? Because language is the single best predictor of later success. Yes, language is the single best predictor of what's going to happen in those executive function skills, what's going to happen in math skills. It's a beautiful predictor of where kids are going to go. And strong language skills are built on strong social skills that start very, very early on in the child's life. So the challenge, one of the challenges I want to give you today is to ask how we can, here's a new term for everybody, languageize environments. Think of it as kind of Simonizing your car. What I want to create is a languageizing all of the environments for young children. Let me show you really how early this starts. Now, of course, I'm a new grandmother, so I had to find some way to put in a movie of my new grandkid, Ellie. And here she is at just 10 weeks of age.
Ooh. Oh. 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 Oh.
It's really impressive to watch this because you're seeing a conversation. You just saw a conversation with a 10-week-old baby. And I hope you noticed that just as in the rhythm experiment you saw earlier, the timing was impeccable. Did you catch that? And at the one moment, of course, I have to say, this is my baby, she's brilliant. And when the baby spent a while, did you notice that long lapse for a while? That she didn't speak, the mother didn't jump in. She waited and then gave a response to the baby. That back and forth, that Jack Shonkoff is called the serve and return. It's universal, and it seems to facilitate language learning, which is the single best predictor of later learning. It's building that foundation. Now, we decided that we should research this more closely and really try to understand how these social interactions build language. And now I want to tell you an exciting story of examining what I'm going to call the foundation for early communication during parent-child interaction. It turns out that I was part of the NICHD study of early child care. So we actually had access to parent-child interactions from 1,364 children. Looking within there, we decided to pick tapes from 60 of these low-income children. Note, they're all going to be low-income children. And within that group, we were going to pick 20 who had high language scores at age 3, 20 who had middling language scores at age 3, and 20 who had struggling language scores at age 3. A friend in Texas, who was also part of the study, sends me the tapes from these babies who did well, who were struggling, or who were in the middle at age 3. Then what we were able to do is go back a year and look at the parent-child interaction. So we put everyone in my lab on it, and I said, what we should look at is the quality of the interaction and the quantity of the interaction. The quality being some of these social things that you saw in that tape that I just showed you with Ellie. That fluidness, that back and forth conversation, what Jack calls that serve and return. Playful routines, where if you picked out a book, did the mom and child know what to do with that book? Did they face it up? Did they turn the pages? Did they have a routine? And did they insert any words or gestures that were symbols so that we could enrich that social routine? We looked at that as the quality of language. And then we also looked at the quantity of language, which is how much mom said, how many words per minute did she utter? And then we asked the critical question. Could we use the quality and quantity of what happened at 2 years of age to predict what that child was going to look like at 3? Could we predict which kids were going to fall into the she's doing really great at age 3 bin and the ones who were going to be struggling? What were the results? Well, here they are. It turned out that the quality of that interaction really mattered and accounted for a full 16% of what that child was going to look like 1 year later. And when we add quality and quantity together, we see that we add another 10%. That means I can tell you 26% more about that 3-year-old by knowing about their social interactions at age 2. Isn't that amazing? So you ask, what about the quantity? How much did quantity uniquely predict? And the answer is only another 1%. Notice that in our study, this is not about poverty. All of the children who I just showed you were from low-income homes. But some of the parents in these low-income homes had quality interactions and some had less good quality in these interactions. And that's what made the difference. The fluid and connected conversations, which I call conversational duets, because you can't sing it alone in a duet, is what made the difference in the child's outcomes. We were able to predict language scores at age 3. And these skills are going to form the foundation for early reading, as you just saw even in the brain development, early mathematics, early social skills, early executive function skills, which is the flexibility that Pat was talking about, that ability to inhibit, that ability to attend, and also will predict to school readiness scores. So becoming brilliant requires that we recognize that, yes, we do need high-quality preschool. That's important. But that persistent gaps between low and middle-income children have already surfaced by age 3. And one of the lessons that I want to leave you with today, and just building on what you already heard from Pat, is that 0 to 3 matters too, and that we must turn some of our attention there. We also need to languagize environments for our children outside of classrooms, in our homes, in our libraries, in our museums, in our schools writ large, where we find that the quality of that interaction, which has been studied in the science, is only 14% of the time are young children getting that quality. That's just not enough. And I'd like to argue that we can also languagize our common spaces, our community spaces. So how are we going to go about this? 2 ways. One is through public messaging about the importance of conversations with our children, and secondly, to languagize our towns and cityscapes by creating smart zones out in the places where people actually go and transforming them to encourage more conversation. Examples of public messaging everywhere. Thank you to Ellen and the Bezos Family Foundation for Vroom. It is unbelievable. Brain-building moments. I encourage everyone to look there and look at the website if you haven't already. You've heard about the 30 million word gap. There's a lot of initiative, just growing awareness of that 30 million word gap, and I want to do a call out to Dana Suskind's new book that came out just 3 weeks ago and is absolutely fabulous. There's Too Small to Fail, Providence Talks, Text for Babies. Together, I think people are starting to become aware of how important it is to have these conversations with young children. Now, how can we languagize cityscapes? By creating smart zones. What can we do not only to disseminate information, but to disseminate experiences? Let me take you to supermarkets. We went into supermarkets, and this is the new artwork that's going into the Tulsa supermarkets in just a couple weeks from now. You know, supermarkets are wonderful places that everyone has to go. Maybe we can transform supermarkets into children's museums and make them rich, ripe, with questions, with conversations. Well, in fact, that's exactly what we did. In Philadelphia, we went in to the Fresh Grocer in the North Philadelphia section, which is a very low-income environment. When the signs were up, you see the red over here, the first red bar, how high it is when the signs were up. And the blue bar to the left is when the signs were down. Simple signs that said, "Hi, I'm a cow. I make milk. Can you find anything else that comes from a cow?" And the parents started talking. In fact, we got 33% more language when the signs were up than when they were down. It then equaled what was going on in the middle income environments. And our newest dream is to languagize cities through what I'm calling urban thinkscapes, working with the William Penn Foundation, who has funded this initiative in Philadelphia, and the George Kaiser Foundation, which is thinking about funding it in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Could we magically transform bus stops into smart zones that encourage family conversations? If we know that the low-income kids by age 3 are having trouble because they don't have experiences with puzzles and blocks, maybe the back of a bus stop can become a puzzle. And with architect Itai Palti from Tel Aviv, we are putting the science into architecture and creating these kinds of structures. To the right, you see the scale bench. That'll get you talking. 2 people on the bench makes the bench go lower than 1 person on the bench. Or what about changing street lights? Imagine if street lights, your everyday street lights, became opportunities for exploration. On the left, exploration in mixing color. And on the right, by creating that upside-down umbrella, we are transforming a street light into an opportunity for a child to create animation on the sidewalk below. Bottom line, becoming brilliant. Becoming brilliant requires school reform and attention to high-quality preschools. But our science also teaches us that paths toward school success start when children are 0 to 3. And it lives beyond the school walls, in our homes, in our museums, in our libraries, and in our streets, in our communities at large. My challenge to you from the science is, can we focus at least some of our attention on 0 to 3, and can we burst out of the schools and also think about changing everyday environments into smart zones that create conversations for our children. Thank you.
I'm sure all of you have watched over the last weekend or so as Mother Nature has taken the state of South Carolina and flooded it pretty dramatically with the storms that have happened. Unfortunately, that has actually affected our program up here in New Hampshire. Our next speaker, Lieutenant General William Tangney, cannot make it here, but thanks to the wonders of technology, we have the next best thing. So he's still going to give his presentation. We've hooked him up by phone, and to more formally introduce the General, I'd like to bring up now our friend Katie Merrow from the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. Katie?
Thank you, Scott, and thanks so much to everyone for being here today, especially our guests from away, to help New Hampshire really launch increased efforts around early childhood. The brain science we've heard about this morning is compelling indeed, but we are equally compelled by the demographic shifts going on in our state. For the past few decades, New Hampshire's economic engine has been fueled by a robust, very strong working age population and significant in-migration from the South. These trends have changed and require us to change our behavior as well. Immigration is slowed to a trickle. Our workforce is aging. We're the third oldest state in the nation. And in fact, we also now have a growing youth opportunity gap and growing pockets of poverty. So the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, informed by conversations with business leaders and community leaders and many of you all across the state, is committing to a new initiative we call New Hampshire Tomorrow, which the foundation of which is increasing investments in early childhood. And over the next few years, the foundation will be, thank you. Thanks so much, but really, we are your community foundation, and the thanks go to our donors and leaders and all of us together. But we will be looking to increase quality in formal and informal learning sessions for the youngest children in the state. We're going to be focusing on keeping kids on track through the teen years and preventing substance use. And finally, working with business leaders and others around pathways to work, particularly strengthening the pathways to the STEM workforce. But beginning indeed in early childhood. And so we really appreciate the conversations and the learning today and the partnerships with all of you. I'm pleased to introduce General Tangney. While we can't have him with us in person, I know we're all going to appreciate his remarks. General Tangney is one of our own. He's a New Hampshire native who spent more than 3 decades working in the United States Army, culminating in his position as Director Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Special Operations Command. His presentation with us today, which we'll hear virtually by phone, is entitled Be All We Can Be, and we're delighted to have General Tangney with us. Thank you.
Good morning, folks. This is Bill Tangney calling in from Columbia, South Carolina. I apologize for not being there in person, but as the slide that Ben Goodman's going to throw up will show, we had a little problem on the way to the airport yesterday. We have had a huge storm here in Columbia, in fact the entire state of South Carolina, where some sections have received over 20 inches of rain. We've had about 15 inches here locally. And to let you know how bad it is, a 75-mile stretch of I-95 has been closed. Interstate 26 and Interstate 20 are closed, and the major bridges going into Columbia and surrounding areas. And there are 381 roads that have been cut, apparently over 125 bridges. So it's a little tough to get back and forth from point A to point B. And it's too bad because I was really looking forward to being back in my home state of New Hampshire. You know, I grew up in Northampton, and I can still recall being in Manchester as a young volunteer, passing out Kennedy stickers at a campaign stop by the late president in the fall of 1960. Now, that was a long time ago, but it seems like almost yesterday. You might be wondering by someone like myself is speaking at an early childhood education conference. And the answer to that's pretty simple. My colleagues and I are very concerned about maintaining the levels of military readiness required for this country to respond rapidly and decisively to complex international crises and threats. And a critical component of that equation is the fitness of America's young men and women. A lot of people think that military readiness equates to military hardware, jets, aircraft carriers, weapons, tanks, but the most powerful tool for the armed forces is still our people. It's our men and women in uniform. And I'm here to tell you today that we have a problem in maintaining that force because there's some very serious issues which have to do with education, fitness, and the criminal problems that you have in front of your young people. If Ben, if you would throw up the slide, the pie chart, and the pie chart, I think pretty well graphically demonstrates the magnitude of the problem. Fully 71% of the young people in this country of military age can't join the military because they don't qualify. The reason they don't qualify is indicated on the next slide, just because of education or lack thereof, inability to pass standardized tests, fitness, which in many cases is tied to obesity, and criminal problems that occur in the background of many of America's youth. The next slide was the map of the United States that shows the problem graphically, academically. Fully 1/5 of the American population of military age can't pass the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, the basic entry test to qualify for military service in all of our components. An additional 1/5 of America's youth does not graduate from high school on time or fails to obtain a GED, which is a minimum qualifier for military service. That's 20% of the population in total. The following slide indicates this 20% is further exacerbated when you look at fitness and obesity by the fact that over 40% of America's youth of military age are obese and can't pass basic military fitness tests. This is an alarming problem, which, as you can see, has increased exponentially in the 13 to 14-year period from 1995 up to 2010. The last data statistic was compiled onto this slide. Importantly, fitness and obesity continues to cause problems, unfortunately, even in the active duty force, because as the force ages, many people, particularly those who are in desk-bound jobs, fail to maintain their proper height and weight standards, and therefore unable to pass the annual physical fitness tests which they're required to take every year. DOD discharges involuntarily more than 5,000 service members every year because of obesity. That's a $1.5 billion problem due to medical costs and also the replacement costs to replace the life cycle circle of those people who are discharged because of inability to comply with service standards. So here we are, 20% because of academic problems, 40% because of obesity. As we show on the next slide, another 10% can't join the military because of prior convictions for felonies, serious misdemeanors, drug use, etc. Folks, this is a very, very serious problem. Again, to summarize, the key primary disqualifiers, as this slide shows, are education, fitness, obesity, and crime. Fortunately, there is a rainbow at the end of the storm, and that rainbow ties in with education, in particular early childhood education. There are a number of studies that show that high-quality early education can help reverse the three primary disqualifiers for military service. Early education is critical in three areas. One, this is improved academics, particularly emphasis on pre-K and early learning activities for children, and also for parents and families. Early intervention programs, which are aimed at promoting better health, better nutritional standards, both homes and schools for the part of young children, which in turn helps to reduce obesity, and also early education efforts, which are tied and that have a demonstrated impact on lowering incidence of crime in America's youth. Let me give you a few examples. A long-term study of preschool program in Michigan showed that participating children were 44% more likely to graduate from high school than children who were left out of the program. A similar study in Chicago found that children who did not participate in such a program were 70% more likely to be arrested for a crime by the age of 18. There's also evidence showing how early learning programs can help reduce America's rising rates of obesity. In New York City, for example, and in Philadelphia and Mississippi, schools improved the nutritional quality of the food served to children, increased their physical activity, and coached their parents on children's healthy education, nutrition, and physical activity needs. As a result of these efforts, along with other broader reforms, rates of childhood obesity dropped from 5 to 25%. Furthermore, research also shows quality preschool is an excellent investment for taxpayers. A well-respected, independent cost-benefit analysis of 49 different rigorous studies of preschool programs showed that preschool can return, on the average, a profit to society more than $26,000 for every child. Now, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to realize that these figures are certainly indicative of the importance of early childhood education and intervention for children and families at the pre-K level. Many of you in the room are business leaders. You may be interested to know that a recent Army report, and if you show the slide then, entitled Strong Students, Strong Futures, and Strong Nations, cautions, and I quote, as indicated, in the coming decade, the United States will face a significant workforce shortfall, and both the military and civilian sectors may not have the skilled labor required to meet the demands of a knowledge-based economy. The effect on our ability to compete globally is going to be devastating if we don't do something immediately and forcefully to reverse the impact. All of this has implications for national security, but this isn't just a problem for the military. This is an American challenge to which we all must pay attention and give effort. Both the civilian and military sectors are competing for the same group of well-educated and healthy recruits and individuals and employees who are on the straight and narrow path. Unfortunately, the idea of investments in early childhood education can sometimes be incorrectly associated with one side of the aisle or the other. This is not a Republican or a Democratic issue. This is an American issue. And it's an issue that the presidential candidates, hopefully who will be attending the luncheons and some of the meetings in Manchester later on today, should have a personal and professional long-term interest. And it's an issue that they should come together for to ensure that we have strong, healthy programs for strong, healthy children based on improved knowledge and also improved diet in our school lunch systems, and programs also, of course, which extend those opportunities to the home as well. Healthy children, healthy families are the future of America. I ask that you join us in our concern in ensuring that this occurs. Thank you very much.
I would like now to bring up my good friend Tom Raffio of the New Hampshire Coalition for Business and Education.
Somewhere along the line, my hair started to get curly, but I know that. But anyway, I knew this day was going to come. I've been at this for a decade, and while I have 2 minutes before I get to introduce Ellen, I'm really hoping that we have some actionable items coming out of today. Scott will handle that towards the end of the day, but we've been talking about this for a decade. Now is really the opportunity for us to do something about this. I've been chair of the Early Learning New Hampshire before Scott. I've been on that board for several years. And everywhere I go, I was recently at my Harvard reunion, a lot of famous people, well more famous than me, and the subject was education. Everything came back to Early Learning New Hampshire. You've heard the science. Later today, you'll hear the business case for it. To invest in, I call it 0 to 4. We also said 0 to 3 today, but an investment in the early years is so darn important. The New Hampshire Coalition for Business and Education, which comprises several leading business people, all policymakers, educators, we have put one of our top priorities is Early Learning New Hampshire. And I must say that my colleagues on the State Board of Education has also embraced the early years. One of our major goals was to eliminate the dropout rate in high school, but as you saw from the business case and the quote from David Brooks, the best correlation between success in high school is that investment in the early years. So here's how our endorsement began. The future prosperity of New Hampshire depends on our ability to steward the next generation who will live, work, and lead in our state. We know that success in high school, college, and career is directly related to a successful early childhood. When we as a state ensure that all children have the opportunity to reach their full potential, the next generation will pay that back through a lifetime of productivity and responsible citizenship. So I'm speaking as a chair of the coalition, as a chair of the State Board of Education, also as the dad of 4 kids who are well-educated, off the payroll, thank God, and they're doing really well. And that investment in 0 to 4 is so critical. And I just want to, again, emphasize the importance that we get some actionable items out of today. You know, there's a national organization called Fight Crime, Invest in Kids. Well, you could easily replace those words with grow the gross domestic product, invest in kids, bolster education, invest in kids, and yes, improve dental and oral health and invest in kids. I have to say that so I can stay employed and keep my real job. But it's true. If the lifetime habits, whether it's oral health, education, all the science that you heard, it's so important. So simply put, today's event wouldn't be happening without our next speaker, Ellen Galinsky. I'd also want to thank Jackie Bezos from the Bezos Family Foundation. Ellen graciously donated her time and talent to thinking how we could put on an early childhood event here in New Hampshire like no other before it. I look around the room. This is just simply amazing. I think Ellen has definitely accomplished that. Don't you think? Let's give it. Don't you? Absolutely. On behalf of the State Board of Education, myself personally, and the coalition, I'd like to thank you, Ellen, from the bottom of my heart for coming here today. Ms. Galinsky is the president and co-founder of Families and Work Institute. Her more than 100 books, now I've written 1 book, and I know that was a killer, so I can't imagine writing 100 books, and reports include the best-selling Mind in the Making, the 7 essential life skills every child needs, which we've all received here today. It's awesome. I hope to get it autographed too. And the flyer that I alluded to was underneath that. She is here today to talk about how to spark lifelong learning, a topic, of course, that I have passion for, and I really hope you give your undivided attention to Ellen, and again, actionable items when we complete today's session. Ellen, come on up. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's I'll echo the other speakers and say good morning, New Hampshire. It's like Good Morning Vietnam. Remember the movie? But it's not my first time here. I've been here many times over the years, and I'm quite thrilled to be back. In fact, I had the pleasure of working with then Governor Shaheen on her agenda for early learning, and it's been quite a success. I'm going to talk about sparking lifelong learning, which is very important from a business perspective, and as many of you know, we work with business. My journey, though, begins more than 15 years ago. At the Families and Work Institute, we were doing a study, we've done a series of studies that ask young people how they feel about the pressing issues that they face growing up. We did a study on how they feel about their employed parents. We did a study about how they feel about work in the future. We did a study about how they feel about the kind of school shootings that tragically seem to be going on even this weekend. And we wanted to do one on learning. And as we did for all of these studies, we went out and talked to young people as we reviewed the literature before beginning the study. And what I heard again and again and again was not just a problem with kids dropping out of school and the kind of problems that we've been talking about, but a real problem with kids dropping out of learning. I found when I asked kids to tell me about something that they had learned, they sat there. When I asked them to tell me about something they hadn't learned, they had a lot of enthusiasm. When I asked them why learning was important, they said learning was important so that you can so that you can graduate to the next grade, so that you can graduate from school, so that you can get a job and not be a bum on the street or flipping burgers. Now that's really important, but what's missing from that? Passion. Intrinsic motivation. Now, I was thinking of these kids because my next door neighbor had just adopted 2 twins from China. They were 8 months old when they came, and yet their eyes were sparkling. They were alive with learning. They wanted to see, to taste, to touch everything. You couldn't stop them from learning. And yet we were doing something that other studies have confirmed, that is turning children off from being lifelong learners. And I know from business how critically important it is. So I stopped that study and went on what has become now a 15, 16-year journey. I had an opportunity that very few people have ever had, which is to travel around research land across different disciplines and to look at what do we know from the science that can spark lifelong learning, that can keep that fire in children's eyes. So what did we learn? And here I'm going to repeat what Pat and Kathy have said. The importance of the first few years and the architecture of the brain which is being built. But I also want to say that we can't stop it. Kathy urged us to talk about 0 to 3. I want to say we have to keep it going after the early childhood years. It isn't too late. We can't forget those children who are growing up now, who are beyond 4 and 5 and 6. A second thing that is important, and I'm going to come back to this later, is it's relationship stupid. It's really all about relationships. The National Academy of Sciences spent a number of years with a group of eminent scientists reviewing the literature in what turned out to be a book like a doorstop. You ever read it, Neurons to Neighborhoods? Quite a read. Quite something to carry around, I'll say, build your muscles. And one of the most important things that they ended up with is there is no development without relationships. So that's really critically important. And then you've heard from both Pat and Kathy the importance of that back and forth conversation with words and without words. In fact, Pat makes the very important point in her new research is that we used to think of the brain as a sponge absorbing everything, but when you look at that Broca area lighting up, that lights up through the back and forth interaction that Kathy showed in that adorable video of your new granddaughter, Ellie. Now I've got to get Zay into one of my videos. I'm sorry I didn't bring the Zay video today. That's my grandson, of course. You've heard a lot about executive function this morning. I don't know, how many of you know have heard of executive function before? Wow, a lot. That's fantastic. So what are executive functions? They're the top-down neurocognitive processes that are involved in goal-directed problem solving. They bring together our social, our emotional, our cognitive capacities to pursue goals. Now, you've probably heard them talked about as soft skills. Wrong. You've probably heard of them talked about as non-academic. Wrong. You've probably heard of them talked about social and emotional learning. Wrong. Executive functions bring together our social, our emotional, and our cognitive capacities to pursue goals. If there's anything I want you all to take away from today is you got to understand that, that the brain is all about networks. And we don't have learning that's only social, emotionally, and not cognitive. In fact, Pat said to me when I talked to her in 2001, asking her the question, she said the brain doesn't show any evidence of that that's not the way the brain works. It's interconnected, and you saw all those neurons connected. So they are the capacities that we use, the core processes in executive functions are the ability to hold things in your memory so that you can use them, the ability to be flexible, and Pat showed you that wonderful experiment of the child, the bilingual child who is flexible in figuring out how to solve that problem so that you can adapt to changing circumstances and not to go on automatic, but do what you need to do to achieve a goal. Those are the basic brain processes, and then those are used as foundations for other skills like being able to delay gratification or to think critically. And it's not just being able to follow directions and sit still. These skills are really important for innovating, and Kathy talked about the creativity gap that are so important. They're the building blocks for school readiness and school success. This is a report from Harvard Center for the Developing Child, when I think they make the critically important point that kids need to learn the what of learning, content, but they also need to learn the how of learning skills, executive function skills. They're very predictive of academic achievement. Here are 3 studies that show in random trials that if you can vary the circumstances and you can teach children these skills, they emerge in all of us, but if you actually teach them, they're very predictive of academic success. They're also important in addressing, we've talked about the college and high school graduation rate and the problems that we have there. This is a study by Megan McClellan. I'm going to take you to her lab in a video in a few minutes. But she did a study that got her into this. It was actually going to be a study of twins, where they were looking at kids who were twins and kids who weren't twins to learn the old nature-nurture debate. And they had this weird finding, which is why I love research, which is that the kids who could pay attention, they called it attention span persistence. Researchers always think of very complicated names that will take you a while to learn, attention span persistence. But it means that the kids can pay attention and not be distracted and work to achieve a goal. That the kids who were 1 standard deviation higher than that when they were 4 years old were almost 50% more likely to graduate from college when they were 25. Amazing. You don't find statistics like that normally. They're also very important of workforce readiness and workforce success, which we've been talking about this morning. In fact, a recent study by the National Association of Colleges and Employers, their Job Outlooks survey, they were asked what are the most important things they're looking for in new candidates for the job. To work in a team structure, to make decisions and solve problems, to plan, organize, and prioritize work, to verbally communicate. Those are all executive function skills, and we're not teaching them. So my second take-home message is that we really need to promote these executive function skills, and I'm going to share how we might do it in a moment. This is a study that I really love. This is a study that was done of all of the children born in Dunedin, New Zealand, and they followed them till they were 32 years of age. And they found that the kids who had good executive function skills, particularly self-control, were, when they were 32 years old, in better health and better wealth, independent of their IQ and independent of their social address at birth or their socioeconomic status. Amazing study, long-term study. So if we're going to make a difference in promoting school readiness, school success, workforce readiness, and workforce success, if we're going to spark lifelong learning, executive functions are a strong place to intervene because they can be improved. So what I found in my now 15-year journey through Researchland, I'm just about to write a book on teenagers and executive function skills because it's another period misunderstood. The development there is as misunderstood as it was about the early childhood years. And so this is something that we can continue to work on. I think it's going to be very important as our society ages. But what I found in these years is that there are 7 skills that are particularly important, and I'm going to go through each. Focus and self-control is the ability to pay attention, to use our working memory so that we can solve the problems that we have, to be flexible, and to go on automatic. So how do we spark that? What do we do to spark that? I'm going to take you now to Megan McClellan's lab and show you some research that she's done. And one of the things that I want to say is that we spark this by keeping the joy in learning. Those little 8-month-old twins who are now 15, who were my neighbors when they were adopted and came to this country, still have a sparkle in their eye. That joy is still there. So we don't, when we think about reforming education, we have to think of it as keeping that joy in learning as well. So let's go to Megan McClellan's lab.
Okay, so first let's everybody touch your head.
This one game that we play, it's really like an opposite Simon Says game. We say touch your head and then touch your toes, and then we say, okay, we're going to be a little tricky. And when I say touch your head, instead of touching your head, I want you to touch your toes. And when I say touch your toes, I want you to touch your head.
So you're doing something that's different from what I say.
It really does tap their ability to control their behavior and their body, really. It's remembering the instructions, being able to pay attention, but also switch to a new rule when we add in a new rule, and then have some or they call it inhibitory control, where you actually demonstrate stopping and then doing something different than you're more of a natural response. You have to stop and do something that's what might be unnatural.
Oh, good one, you guys.
How children did on this little task predicted where they ended up at the end of the school year on reading, math, and vocabulary, and it also predicted the gains they made in these academic outcomes. We did an intervention with the Circle Time games. We randomly assigned children to an intervention group or a control group, and then what we did was we had children for 8 weeks go through these intervention games that were similar to these Circle Time games, but each week, each session, they increased in complexity. So they continued to add in new rules. And what we do with red light, green light is we start reversing the rules. And so usually in red light, green light, red means stop and green means go. And so we have them stomp their feet when you see when I put up the green circle, and the red circle means to stop, and then reverse it. So green is stop and red is stomp your feet. And then we change the colors. So blue may be clapping and yellow is stopping. And so then we can change the actions and we can reverse those also. It can get quite challenging, and I think you have to be a little careful that you proceed sort of gradually into each level so that children get each rule before you add in a new one. One finding that we have that's pretty exciting is that the children who are low-income English language learners in our intervention group demonstrated an additional 10-point gain in math compared to other children in the intervention.
So in that experiment, what she found is that you play these games. Teachers always play Circle Time games, but you just play these games that promote executive function skills, and it makes a big difference. We've taken Mind in the Making, we've turned it into teaching modules. We partner with Room, whom you'll hear about from Jackie Bezos later, and with Megan McClellan and Circle Time games, and we have early preliminary evidence from the intervention that we're doing that in 6 weeks of our intervention, kids made greater gains in executive function skills using these 3 interventions together in both math and in executive function skills that it takes other interventions 6 months to produce. So these are powerful little things that you can do to promote skills. Perspective taking means understanding how other people think and feel. It is both beyond empathy. It's feeling what they feel, but it's also understanding what's going on in the minds of others. And in research that Larry Aber has done, he's been worried and spent his career looking at aggression and violence in schools. Again, something that we are all very concerned about, yet sadly again. And he found that the efforts to teach kids problem-solving skills weren't all that effective. So there was a missing ingredient. Again, why he loves research, why I love research. The missing ingredient turned out to be what they call hostile attribution bias. Remember, attention span persistent, this is hostile attribution bias. It means that the kids most likely to get into fights jumped to conclusions about what other kids were thinking and feeling when they didn't have enough information. So they took a literature curriculum, a normal literature curriculum in the early grades of school, and they taught kids to step back and think about the characters. What do you think that character was thinking and feeling? And they found that not only did they improve kids academically, but they reduced violence in the school. Again, these are things that we can do to spark lifelong learning and keep it joyful. Communicating. This is the skill that employers think is missing most in new entrants to the workforce. Maybe it's because we're all on our smartphones and tablets, et cetera. But it's something that they're worried about. To communicate, it's beyond literacy. It's figuring out what it is you want to communicate and then being able to, so you have to go on, you have to have inhibitory control because you have to really figure out what's most important. You have to prioritize. But then it's understanding how it will be heard. And you've just heard Kathy and her colleagues, Roberta Golenkoff and Lauren Adamson, talk about the importance of conversation duets. It takes two or more to do that dance, and these are with and without words. Making connections is the basis of symbolic representation. It's the stand for relationship. It's the basis of language, knowing that those sounds and stand for words, knowing that words stand for objects or concepts, or that numbers stand for quantities of things. Making unusual connections is the basis of creativity, something that is critically important in a world, as Kathy says, where you can Google for information. It's the people who can see the unusual connections who are going to do well, and the people we need in the workforce. Simple games like playing Chutes and Ladders or games like that with kids have been found to improve math ability if you play them in a way that helps the kids understand the math behind the game. That is, if you spin the spinner, and instead of saying 1, 2 as you're going forward, 1, 2, but if you're on a square that says 6, you say 7, 8 as you move 2 squares forward. And that helps kids learn to estimate numbers, to understand which numbers are bigger and smaller. There's critical thinking. Obviously, critical thinking is critical in a world where there's way too much information. And one of the factors that we can do to spark lifelong learning is not answer children's questions too quickly. This is a study by Laura Schultz at MIT, and she looked at who remained curious in life. And what she found was that the people who remained curious were the people who kept exploring, were when the teachers or the adults didn't jump in and tell kids how those, for example, those boxes that you see there work. Taking on challenges. We do studies of business leaders at IBM and Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan Chase and so forth, and we ask them what's the most important skill that they feel they've used to get ahead. And it's not just coping with stress, it's taking on challenge, it's trying that hard thing, it's that stretch assignment in the business world that's so important. You learn that in many different ways. In fact, Carol Dweck has shown that how we praise children makes a difference. If we praise children for their personality, oh, you're so smart, you're really good at math, you're really good at reading, you're athletic, that kids want to hold on to that label and they'll be less likely to try something new or hard. If we praise them for their effort or strategy, we help them both learn to think about their strategy and they'll do better. New research by Stephanie Carlson shows that if we let children pretend, that is, if they're trying a really tough or boring kind of a problem, if they pretend to be someone they admire, like Batman or Dora the Explorer for little kids, that they will persist, they will be almost a year different in their ability to solve a problem by just helping pretend. So play or playful learning is really critical to sparking lifelong learning. And finally, we come back to self-directed, engaged learning, because we need intrinsic and extrinsic learning. Kids need to be lifelong learners. They need to want to learn, to be challenged to learn. And it comes back to relationships. So the last video that I'm going to show you is Edtronic.
Dr. Edward Tronick of the University of Massachusetts, Boston, has devised a way to show how important social connection is to babies and how much it affects them when a connection with a parent or caregiver is broken. First, Dr. Tronick places 6-month-old Mackenzie and her mother face to face. He asks Mom to talk and play with her daughter the way she normally does.
Hi, sweetheart.
Obviously, their connection is strong. The baby is engaged, responsive, clearly emotionally content. Then, Dr. Tronick instructs the mother to disengage by making a still face. She stays there, but doesn't respond to her baby. Mackenzie is confused at first. She's not used to Mom acting like this. Mom turns back, but keeps the still face. Mackenzie expects her to re-engage, but when she doesn't, look how the baby reacts. Even at this young age, she tries to entice Mom to interact with her. She reaches out. She smiles. She flails her hands. All strategies for getting Mom's attention. When that doesn't work, she becomes fussy, emotionally agitated. And finally, she just gives up.
The meaning of the event is this emotion that the infant has experienced in relationship to this breaking of the connection in relationship to the mother. And that's a fearful, frightening thing. And the infant will do a lot to try and overcome it. But when they fail with a sense of helplessness and a loss of control.
Dr. Tronick then asks Mom to re-engage. It takes a moment, but soon the world goes back to normal for Mackenzie.
Now, Ed Tronick goes on to say that only about 20 to 30% of the time are we in sync with someone else. The important thing is not necessarily being in sync, it's getting back into sync, because it's getting back into sync through which we learn. So relationships are critical to learning. They're as important to us as adults as they are to children of any age, as Ed Tronick has shown in our studies. So to spark lifelong learning, it's about us. It's not just about the children. I want to end with actually 2 stories. One was I was doing focus groups in Chicago about this study on children and learning. And this is with 7th grade kids. And one 7th grade boy said, you know, I can tell what kind of year I'm going to have from the moment that I walk into school on the first day of. And I said, how? How can you tell? He said, I look at the teacher's face. I said, what are you looking at? He said, I'm looking at her eyes. And I can tell from her eyes whether she likes the kids or not. And I can tell from her eyes whether she likes teaching what she's teaching. So if we're going to spark lifelong learners, we've got to be lifelong learners ourselves. Yesterday I went to a memorial service for an incredible man in my neighborhood. And at the end of wonderful tributes about this wildly inventive, creative, talented man, his wife stood up and he said, he had unbounded curiosity. And that reminded me of Irving Harris. For some of you may know him. He was a very important philanthropist. I went to his 90th birthday, and he said, after all, people gave lots of tributes to him, you know, I was lucky that I was born curious and no one took it away. So we want to spark lifelong learning. We have to keep that fire in ourselves and in children. Thank you. And now it gives me huge pleasure to introduce Jackie Bezos. Jackie has said that she loves the intersection between a big idea and passion. She says that's the sweet spot for philanthropy. For the Bezos Family Foundation, that sweet spot is education, from birth or from the earliest years up through high school. Jackie and Mike co-founded the foundation in 2000. And their big idea is an early learning nation. And you, here, we all together, are the first state that's becoming an early learning state. So it's a particular pleasure to be here. Jackie is creative. She is wise beyond almost anyone I've ever worked with. She is knowledgeable. She's inspired, and she's inspiring. If anyone in the world can make an early learning nation happen in this country, it's Jackie Bezos. It has been my huge honor to work with her for the last 4 years. Thank you.
I am truly humbled to be here in New Hampshire, in a room packed with people that really want to make a difference and just don't want to, they're going to. I'm thrilled also to be at the very first Early Learning Nation event. Jackie, nice job. I want to take you on a short journey, or at least the description will be short. The journey was not quite so short. We kept on hearing all this amazing science, the science that you've heard today, and realizing that it could make such a difference if it could be put into the hands of people that could really act upon it, which are parents and caregivers, the important adults in a child's life. But how do you make that happen? How do you take something that could be too complex to put into words that would be actionable for a parent? So we started this journey, and after hearing about the science, we started this journey by hiring a human-centered design firm named IDEO out of San Francisco. They spent 4 months canvassing the United States, talking to parents living in poverty and low income about their aspirations for their children, and if they knew they could make a difference in their child's trajectory. And invariably, there would be a lot of tears during these discussions because actually no one had ever asked them what their aspirations were for their children. And they did not know they could make a difference. And when the science was explained to them, did they want to know more? And the response was always yes, we want to know. What can we do? So with this knowledge, we went back and decided that we would try to form an advisory group of scientists. 3 of them you've heard from today. Thank you, Kathy, Pat, Ellen. But there's a total of 13 scientists that signed on to help us create this body of knowledge for parents. We then translated the science into a 5th grade reading level and came up with what we think is a pretty creative way to put it into the hands of parents and caregivers. We talked to Eldar Shafir, who wrote the book Scarcity, and he kept us honest. He said, you have to be in the tunnel with the people whose lives you want to affect. So to be in the tunnel with very busy parents who oftentimes are working 2 jobs, and the most concerning thing for them is to keep food on the table and a roof over their children's heads. They had no extra time. They had no extra money. So we had to design something that could be distributed, that would be prompts that would be distributed that would not require extra time, that they could use in the moments that they were already interacting with their children at bath time, bedtime, mealtime, and that would be aspirational for them and that would include them in the action in a way that they'd never been included before. So we refer to parents and caregivers in the lives of children as brain builders. So with this body of knowledge, we created, based on the science, 1,000 tips that parents can use during their everyday moments to transform their routines into brain-building activities. How do we distribute them? So through partnerships. Through partnerships, we've been able in the last year to reach 100,000 families with brain-building opportunities. They can either be presented in small tip cards like this, that on one side tell you a fun activity, all based on serve and return, and also based on executive function, that you can do with your child. They're all age appropriate. And on the back flip side, it tells you what just happened in your child's brain and what that means for his or her future. Or you can get it in app form. You know, there's always an app for everything now. So the 1,000 tips will be here. You can sign up your child by his or her name and submit their age, and every day you'll get a push function delivered to you at a time that you pick. My room comes every day at 7 a.m. And you can also sort by where you are, the time of day, and after you do the tip, you get a high five, a digital high five that says, "Way to go, Brain Builder." So this app, surprisingly enough, at least to us, has been downloaded in 170 countries. So we're hopeful that not only will we build a brain-building nation, an early learning nation, but also possibly a globe. And what would it look like? What would it really look like if all children's needs were met and potential was acted upon? And we would have a common knowledge base, but also a common language to talk about the importance of the first 5 years of life. So I'd like to share with you this afternoon, maybe it's still this morning, I'd like to share with you a short video that we made at the foundation that honors parents' unique position and the unique asset. But before I do that, I'd like to tell you about how important the business sector is to making certain we have an early learning nation. We have been so humbled and honored to partner with some of the business sectors. Procter & Gamble is helping us by messaging on their Pampers channel. Johnson & Johnson is actually going to put brain-building messages right on pack. For us, the holy grail is the diaper, so we're still looking for somebody who's willing to put brain-building messages on diapers. So if you know anybody that might be interested in this, there's 8,000 diaper changes during the first 3 years of life. That's 8,000 brain-building opportunities. We're partnering with Univision to be able to bring right on the television set brain-building moments for parents. Everything we have is translated into Spanish, and everything we've done is free, downloadable on the website, and so you can make your own tip cards, or you can order them at cost. And I think you'll see when you watch this video how important the brain science is to parents. Thank you.
Yes, I'm going to hang up the jackets, okay? I'm really rushing all the time. I don't have enough time just to sit down with them.
Being a full-time mom and having a full-time job, it's not easy. I always worry, am I doing enough with my kids? Am I doing the important stuff that they need?
Can't imagine what is in here.
It feels really powerful.
You guys.
You already have all it takes.
Maybe I just didn't look at it that way because I always want better.
Do you put your feet in them?
No.
No? I know that I can do it.
Which one is rough?
This one.
It's amazing the little things that we do, we don't even realize we're teaching our kids.
You did it, Mom.
Yay, good job.
You don't really think of brain development at that young of an age, you know, when you're 3 months old.
Thank you, New Hampshire.
I'd like to draw your attention to the screens and the video I Am a Promise from the children of the Eastside Learning Center. Joey, Hayden, and Hannah, this is fun. I love your outfits. I'm gonna ask you guys each what you wanna be when you grow up. What do you wanna be?
A horse trainer.
A horse trainer? Oh, that's a good one, Hannah. Hayden, what do you wanna be?
A surgery.
A surgeon? Whoa. And Joey, what do you wanna be?
A president.
A president? Man, those are some cool jobs. So do you think you guys can be whatever you wanna be when you grow up?
Yeah!
So how do you do that though? Like, how do you get to do what you wanna do? Do you think you have to go to school to get good at these jobs?
No.
No? You don't have to go to school? What, do you just wake up and you know what you're doing? But teachers know how to do surgery, right? So you can learn from teachers?
No.
Yeah, sure. Oh my gosh. And I bet teachers will teach you how to take care of horses.
No, they don't teach them.
They don't teach that?
Surgery on your back.
I hope not. My back feels pretty good right now, but if I have to have surgery, I'm calling you. Let's talk about your outfits. Jack, let's start with you. What do you want to be when you grow up?
A scientist.
And what do you want to do?
Make potions.
Make potions? What happens if you mix the wrong ones together?
Blow up.
Yeah, you think so? I think so too. So you got to be good at it, right? What do you want to be, Emma?
A police officer.
What do police officers do?
Keep people safe.
They keep people safe? Yeah, they drive around in their cars. What would be your favorite part of being a police officer?
Keeping people safe.
You think you'll be good at that? How come?
That's
Just because? You just think you're a natural police officer? I believe you. You're a woman of few words, but I think you're going to be good at this job. Okay, Landon, what do you want to be?
a pizza man.
Now, do you like pizza?
Yeah.
That's a good thing, because if you were a pizza man and you didn't like pizza, that probably wouldn't be very fun. Staying in school is important, right? Well, this is exciting. I think you're going to be a great police officer. I think you're going to be a great scientist. And I think you're going to be the best pizza man. I can't wait to buy your pizza. Awesome, guys. Kids, come on up here. Ladies and gentlemen, the children from Eastside Community School. Down the room? Okay, you ready? Okay, we're gonna wave to everybody? Okay, we're gonna wave on the count of three. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Big waves! Yay! Can you bow? Oh. Excellent. Thanks, you guys. Thank you for being here. We have a really special and very exciting roundtable discussion for you with some truly great voices. And to introduce that roundtable discussion is Dr. Yvonne Goldsberry from the Endowment for Health. Yvonne?
Good morning, or it's late morning, actually, by now, everyone. At the Endowment for Health, we envision a New Hampshire where all children are ready to enter kindergarten. When they enter kindergarten, they're ready to be successful. And by all children, we mean the kids that you just saw from the Eastside Center. We also mean the children that live up in Coos County who may be eligible for free and reduced lunch. We mean the children of new immigrants that may live in Nashua, Manchester, Concord, or Laconia. We mean the majority of the Hispanic children that live in our state that by the time they get to 4th grade, they're not reading at grade level. And we also mean the kids that live on my street, the Monadnock region, that might otherwise be called average. So we mean all of the children in New Hampshire. And at the Endowment, we share with you a deep understanding and commitment to the need to invest in our children because all kids are a promise and a possibility. The economic future in New Hampshire depends on our ability to raise the next generation to be skilled, innovative workers who can adapt to a changing world. And smart policy investments in young children will result in healthy, learning, and thriving families. So the next part of today's program is about solutions. So we're going to hear about solutions for today and tomorrow. And it's great pleasure for me to introduce the moderator of this session, Cokie Roberts. Ms. Roberts is a political commentator for ABC News and also contributes political analysis for National Public Radio. And thank you, Cokie, because I listen to you all the time. In her more than 40 years in broadcasting, she's won countless awards, including 3 Emmys. She was cited by the American Women in Radio and Television as one of the 50 greatest women in the history of broadcasting. Her #1 bestseller, We Are Our Mother's Daughters, is an account of women's roles and relationships throughout American history. Ms. Roberts also sits on the board of Save the Children. Would you please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Cokie Roberts.
Well, thank you. Mark and Kevin, why don't you come on up? I, of course, didn't know this picture was going to be here. And as you can see from the Capitol being there, it was a campaign picture, right? My father was in Congress at the time, but running for governor of Louisiana. I'm thrilled to tell you he lost. But the reason that we were all trotted out was for campaign purposes. And my parents, because of being in politics, were away a good bit. And in fact, they were away for a period of time not long after World War II. And they went to Europe, and you had to go by ship. And I was 4 years old, and it was before people went to pre-K, but I did. I went and enrolled myself in school. And I didn't have to cross any streets. That was the important thing. And so when my parents got home, they found me in school. And we used to switch schools at half year. We'd spend half year in New Orleans and half year in Washington school. And so when my mother went to pay, the woman who ran the school said actually my mother had not enrolled me in the school, that I had enrolled myself. And so she couldn't pay, and my poor mother for the rest of Miss Aiken's life had to find something nice to send her for Christmas. But it was the beginning of my commitment to early childhood education. And it's been there ever since, as it is for these gentlemen. Mark Shriver, who's over there, is the head of the Save the Children Action Network. Mark created what we call now SCAN, because as the head of Save the Children U.S. programs, which are very much involved with really 0 to 3 and then early childhood education and literacy in schools, he realized that the programs were wonderful and did great work, but that they needed advocacy to have them get funded and to be able to get to scale in a variety of places. So he created the Save the Children Action Network and has been very involved here in New Hampshire for the last several months, working with WMUR, having a conversation with the candidate on a weekly basis for a while there, right? Yeah. And Kevin Madden, many of you have probably seen on TV over the years. Kevin is at the Hamilton Place Strategy Groups, and he has been working on public policy issues and advocacy in a variety of ways. But Kevin is also an expert in crisis management, which has served him well as someone who's represented people in both the private and public sector. You probably saw his face as a spokesman for Mitt Romney, both in 2012 and in 2008. Which leads me, Kevin, to the question, what is a nice Republican boy like you doing in a place like this?
Well, it was interesting when I checked in at the hotel last night. They were like, "So have you stayed here before?" Right. I was like, "Well, 3 presidential campaigns. I've probably stayed in every room in this hotel."
Right.
But,
well, you know,
I got very involved in this issue because I did see, my experiences from having worked on both congressional campaigns and having worked on presidential campaigns is that oftentimes Republicans lose an ability to talk about issues from a value standpoint, and oftentimes only talk about issues from a dollars and cents standpoint. Too oftentimes they're thinking, well, how is this going to look like, what's this issue going to look like through the lens of the Wall Street Journal editorial page, which, while an important intellectual experiment, oftentimes loses the fact that, for example, on healthcare, nobody ever sat and got a diagnosis from their doctor and said, well, gee, I wonder what my free market values are or how they're going to help me through this process. And so I looked at the issue of education as a key way to talk to voters through this value-centric framework. And particularly with early childhood education, early learning, I saw it as an important way to talk about that economic opportunity, and that we hear it now from Jeb Bush and Paul Ryan and others, the right to rise. How is it that we build a stronger, better future, provide more opportunity, provide a stronger economies, stronger children who can contribute to economies, and how do we do that? And I found early childhood education was a key issue and a key way to start making that argument to many voters.
but we don't hear it in the political dialogue very often. And Mark, that's something that you've been trying to change.
Absolutely, Koki, and thank you for being the moderator of this, and thank you all very much for coming today. It's great to be on a panel with Kevin. I think this is a bipartisan issue. We've seen it, leadership on a state level, as Kevin mentioned. We see it in places as diverse as Michigan. We see it in Alabama. We see it in Oklahoma. Not exactly blue, hardcore Democratic states. What we don't see is that leadership in Washington on a consistent basis. There's a lot of talk about it, but for one reason or another, and Senator Shaheen and I were just talking about this, we really need to really talk about and stress the accountability of our federal leaders on both the presidential level and on the congressional level to take steps. You know, I come from a political family, and Koki does as well. Kevin's obviously been around politics for a long, long time. And I was in the state legislature. It's easy to nod your head and say, yes, kids are our most important resource, or they're one of the most important resources. And then when push comes to shove, not put the investment into kids. Because kids don't have a PAC, they don't vote, and in many cases, the kids that are struggling the most, poor kids, their parents don't give money, and the parents don't vote. So this is the easiest group to ignore. And that's why we started Save the Children Action Network, and we've worked with Kevin and with others talking about, not just talking about the issue, but as Koki mentioned, sponsoring here in Manchester, the conversations with the candidates to reach across the aisle and to ask questions of folks as diverse as Governor Bush, Marco Rubio, to
Martin How have those gone, Mark? How have those conversations gone?
You know, I think you see leadership coming from different angles, Koki, you know. I mean, Secretary Clinton, who you'll hear from this afternoon, has spoken about this issue for a number of years. Governor Bush has made an investment in Florida on early childhood education. The quality is not that good, but the access is there. So we need to stress in conversations with people like Governor Bush and with Secretary Clinton and Governor O'Malley, both Democrats and Republicans, that we need high quality services, and we will not wait. I mean, you know, Kevin's heard me say this, and I can't remember whether you think this is a great idea or a lousy idea, but what we really need is we need the NRA for kids. You know, and people say it's a terrible analogy, but the bottom line is that, you know, you have to respect the fact that the NRA has an issue, they believe passionately about it, and they get people committed to it. And, you know, there's a nice population here right now, but I guess I'd ask you, who's given money based solely on their state or federal elected officials' stance on early education in this room? 1, 2, 3. You don't count, Dr. Kuhl. You're from Washington State, so you're out. So there's 3 of us. I mean, I don't know what your reaction is.
No, you make a very important point, and where we have seen success at the candidate level, whether it's been, and Mark's organization has been very good, not just looking at presidential candidates, but looking in all these battleground states at some of the lower, some of the down ballot races. But where we have seen success is when we personalize and localize these issues and our involvement and how important it is to those communities. And that's something that we're doing right now with the presidential candidates, is reminding people and elevating so many of the voices from the ground up in states about this issue. And then also reminding them and supporting them when they have had issues or success or progress on the early childhood education issue in their states. For example, we saw with Governor Bush, there's a long record of early childhood education initiatives that are successful in Florida. Doing so with the same with Marco Rubio, who's also from Florida, or pointing out that there are candidates that are bedrock conservatives in places like Indiana or Tennessee that are promoting this, South Dakota. It's not just a blue state issue. So when we do that, when we personalize and localize it, it's important. But the other thing is, too, when we see this with folks like the Bezos Foundation and their support for an early learning network, is making sure that these best practices and that communities that are active are talking to each other, and that we create this early learning nation, this early learning network of advocates that are organized like any other political campaign to talk to each other and to hold their candidates and policymakers accountable. That's where we've made strong success in the last few years.
Well, actually, I was just last week in Kentucky with Save the Children, looking at some of our programs in Appalachia, and the politicians who showed up were all Republicans, and including the president of the Senate, who says that annually the House takes Save the Children out of the budget, and annually he puts it back in, and he says, I don't know what their problem is, because, you know, really, when I'm putting something in that says, Save the Children, it kind of works for me.
And we have, in some of these areas, we have seen like a policy arms race, in the sense that Republicans and Democrats are racing to take credit for their support of early childhood education programs and their success.
But not enough, and that's Mark's point. But,
Right.
but you started, Kevin, by talking about the values aspect of it. But there is also a financial aspect of it. I mean, we know that a quality early childhood program saves a lot of money.
Absolutely, and that's where I think sometimes I do encounter a lot of skepticism, and I do get this, are you sure you're a Republican, and how did you end up working on this issue? I think that helps address some of the skepticism of my friends that we engage amongst center-right audiences. I talk to them about the importance of showing this value-centric economic platform, but also it's very consistent, and that's what we've seen with some of these governors who have implemented these programs in states, and Republican governors who have advanced this. They recognize the dollars and cents on it. They recognize that it is much easier and it is to our advantage to help educate young children and build strong children than it is to try and fix a broken man or a broken woman on the other end of the equation. And that fits with these conservative fiscal principles that many of my colleagues on the center-right side of the political spectrum have always consistently advocated. So it's educating them about that, it's engaging them, and then it's continuing with the follow-up. And there are times when we get discouraged, but when we continue to advance and advocate about how this is consistent with conservative principles, we tend to make progress.
Mark, at the beginning of this very interesting day, Virginia Barry talked about being at the White House in 1997, talking about these issues, and you looked at me with a certain amount of frustration and said, what do we do? What do we come away from this today that makes it different, so that we're not still 30 years or 20 years ago?
It's amazing. I mean, you see an unbelievable science presentation where you see that the kids' brains are firing with this type of stimulation. You're going to hear from John Pepper, who ran a huge corporation, about it from a business perspective in a couple of minutes. You hear about it from the military. You know, so often politicians don't lead, and they really are waiting for the people to tell them what to do. And you see this across the country, that from the groundswell of, you know, I said to Koki, are we at a tipping point where in the next, couple of years this might actually happen federally? Because you see it in Alabama. You see the biggest push coming in Alabama from the Chamber of Commerce. You see, a groundswell of support across the country, and you see these statistics. James Heckman from the University of Chicago, which is not a liberal institution, who's a Nobel economic winner, saying that the ROI is somewhere around $7 for every dollar invested is $7 returned. So why isn't this happening? It's not happening because we aren't demanding it. And really the fault rests with us. And it's because we haven't demanded from our state leaders, our city leaders, our federal leaders, that we're not going to put up with it. I mean, the statistic that stuns me, Koki, is that if my kid, when our children were 4 years of age, is 18 months ahead of a kid that's living in poverty. And we are going to spend billions of dollars trying to remediate that gap, and in most cases, honestly, we're not going to do it.
Or we'll spend it on jail.
Yeah, well, you can talk to countless guys and women that are in public safety, and they'll tell you that they look at the reading scores, and the kids that aren't reading at grade level, but they end of third grade, those are the number of prison beds they're going to build in the future. It's that clear, the connection. But for some reason or another, we just put up with this lack of a commitment from a federal level, and we just let it go. So that's why Save the Children Action Network was created. We want to hold people accountable. We don't want to just do the lobbying work and the education work, which is really important, but we want to say we're going to put money in the political process, just like, the NRA does, just like AARP does. We sponsored conversation with the candidates 4 years ago. It was AARP did it because we wanted to have questions asked of Governor Bush and Secretary Clinton and Martin O'Malley and Senator Rubio. We wanted to have them be asked these questions and be on the record, and then hear about it constantly from people over the course of the next few months. That's why we're sponsoring the debates that are sponsored by WMUR again in December and January, Republican and Democrat. Because look, there's going to be a divided Congress and a divided federal branch probably next year.
Well, certainly next year.
Well, yes, but I meant at the end of next year. The next Congress, it'll probably be divided, maybe, who knows? But the bottom line is Republicans are going to need help from the Democrats if we're going to push this forward, and vice versa. So we can't make this just a Democratic issue or a Republican issue. We really have to work.
Yeah, and just to add on that, the changing dynamics of of advocacy, I think, are important. And I think Mark's group and so many of the groups that we've worked with recognize this. And it's no longer a top-down advocacy environment where, take the House, for example. I mean, chairmen just don't have the power to ram through legislation anymore. The same way folks in leadership don't have the same way in states, party leaders can't dictate who gets on and off the ballot. Instead, what we've seen is because of technology and because of the way because of the way advocacy organization works now, we're seeing the voices from the bottom up begin to be empowered again. And I think that's where everybody in this room and your ability to work with each other and really hold a lot of our policymakers accountable are the new real ace in the hole. And that, I think, is where that understanding of that dynamic and seeing so many of the organizations that are early childhood advocates recognizing that and bringing to life the voices around this country in support of it, it's really an important part of what we will eventually see as future success.
How do you also just get the parents involved? I mean, it was wonderful when Jackie was showing us the app and the 1,000 tips, but seems to me that that's the place where you can really, first of all, make a difference in the children's lives, but secondly, make a difference in terms of getting a groundswell going.
Well, just real quick on the app, if you haven't downloaded it, please do. It's an amazing tool to engage children with. My youngest son, Sean, has just turned 5, so I'm starting to lose the window of it here. But I use the app as and I talked earlier about a policy arms race, but you really do see how children become so engaged when you use the app or you use the tools that Vroom provides you to engage with your children. We were riding in the car one time, and I decided to use the car function. Actually, you can use the app in a way where you get to choose what setting you're working in, whether you're cooking at home or whether you're riding in a car. And when I started to engage Sean on the app where it's child as author, the child gets to tell a story based on questions that you tell him. My oldest boys, who are 7 and 9, they wanted to be part of it. They wanted to be part of this brain-building experience that we were engaging with Sean. And I think that
also he was getting all the attention.
That too. It was a 5-hour ride to Lake Chautauqua. But the great thing about the app is that it is what we see here is the science is indisputable. But I think oftentimes parents, when they hear science and math, like me, they get intimidated. I don't like science. I don't like math. But the app and so many of these the early childhood environments that we create, they make the parent feel empowered. The parent as scientist is the best thing about the Vroom app, and it's also the best thing about so many of these excellent early childhood education programs is that the parent feels empowered. And I think the more we go into these communities and tell parents that they should not be intimidated by this, that this is an empowering experience, I think that really does help the parents get more involved.
Koki, if I could just add, I mean, I think what Kevin just described was absolutely terrific. And I would just say that the parent being as the advocate, you got to do that on the political front as well.
That's what I meant.
And I think that, I was in the state legislature in Maryland for 8 years. If 2 tables just here show up in my office and talk to me about an issue, I'm going to pay attention. And I know New Hampshire has a lot of state reps.
Like most of the state.
Yeah, but you know, just a few people can make a big difference. So sometimes I think we look around and we think, God, it's just, you know, me and or my 5 best friends and I will go down. We don't want to go to the state legislature. We're not going to have an impact. Or why write a letter, or why make a phone call and get 5 other people to do it? If you get 5 or 10 or 15 people on a state rep or a city council, those politicians will listen to you because they're getting elected with just a few votes. And when it starts moving in a statewide or a citywide basis, the feds are going to pay attention to you. We were just involved out in Washington state in the Seattle ballot initiative that passed with an overwhelming majority to increase the property tax to invest it in early ed. Now King County, which is twice the size of Seattle, has a King County ballot initiative to increase dollars into early education. State of Washington just did a big increase in early ed. And I think that came about partly because of what happened in Seattle, partly because of the ongoing efforts in that state. You're seeing momentum in Washington state. What does that have to do with New Hampshire all the way across the country? You can see these examples of success, and they all start from the groundswell of a couple of committed people. There's that old Margaret Mead line. You probably know it much better than I do. I'll butcher it, but never doubt the power of a couple people to change the world. It's the only thing that ever does. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create an army of people that are educated on the science, that have listened to the business folks, that put these pieces together, and working together demand accountability. But we need foot soldiers, and just the way you were educating your kids, we need foot soldiers to do that in the state legislative process, on the federal process, or even in the local process.
So I think you've got marching orders as foot soldiers. And I think Senator Shaheen will tell you that the same thing is true at the federal level. People are always amazed when I say to them that a constituent showing up with something that constituent cares about is more important than a funder showing up from outside of the state. And that is just universally the case. So it really does make a tremendous difference. Thank you both for your involvement and for convening us today, and we will continue this conversation.
Great to be here. Thanks to everybody.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
And it is my high honor to be able to now introduce New Hampshire U.S. Senator Jeanne Shaheen for a few words.
Thank you all. Thank you, Scott, for that nice introduction. And I have some show and tell that I brought, so I'm just going to put it down there. It's so exciting to be here with all of you who share my passion for the importance of early childhood education, and I'm sure who know so much and have been working on this issue for such a very long time. I know we've got a lot of very important people in the room, and you're getting ready to eat lunch, so I'm not going to call out anybody, but there's one person that I really wanted to call out because she's been in the trenches working on this issue. She's responsible in large part for this forum, and she is there every day doing everything she can to promote early childhood education, and I think Jackie Cowell deserves a real round of applause. Back there. Wow. The goal of making sure every child gets a good start in life is every bit as important as President Kennedy's plan to put a man on the moon, or an American on the moon, within the decade. And one of the things he said is that we do this not because it's easy, but we do it because it's hard. And I know that expanding access to early childhood education, getting universal pre-K is not going to be easy, because I've been working on it with so many of you for such a long time. It's going to be hard, but we've got to do it because it's going to make such a difference in the future of our kids, in the future of this country, and in our ability to compete in the world. When I was governor, my first governor's meeting I went to in Washington had Rob Reiner there with a number of experts presenting the scientific research on early brain development. And I remember being so impressed by that because some of you have heard this story. They showed a graph of child development and they compared it to public expenditures on children. And I got so excited about this and talked about it so much that I had the opportunity to chair the Education Commission of the States as I was leaving the governor's office and made early childhood the focus of my tenure there. And so when I left, they gave me that graph. Now, I tried to see if we could put it up on the screen, but we don't have the technology. So you may not be able to see this very well, but what you ought to be able to see is that there's a line here that starts and goes up very dramatically in the earliest years of a child's life. And then it levels out later on. And then there's another line here that starts really low in those early years in a child's life and goes up dramatically as kids get older. Well, this is early brain development, and this is public spending on children. We are spending our resources where they are least effective because we are not supporting early childhood education. So we end up getting the least bang for the buck. As Kevin said, this is something that should appeal to everybody in the room. I used to always say, if you don't support it because it's the right thing to do, you should support it because it's the cost-effective thing to do. And a 2003 study by the Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank looked at the return on investment in early education in Minnesota. And the study found an ROI of as high as $8 for every dollar invested, which is a far greater return than any other public investment in economic development, I can tell you. And other studies have shown the return to be as high as $17 for every dollar invested in early learning. And so I know I'm speaking to the choir here, but why is that? It's because children who have those high-quality early experiences are less likely to repeat grades. The mayor of Nashua is here. Mayor Lozo, one of the things that we learned from Nashua when they were talking about public kindergarten is they looked at how kids were doing in repeating grades, and they discovered that kids who didn't have kindergarten were much more likely to repeat grades, and so it was cost effective. They are less likely to require remedial education, to engage in criminal activity, or to utilize the social safety net later in life. So we can spend the money in the early years when it's most effective, or we can wait and use it for prisons and for remedial education and to support high school dropouts. It makes so much more sense to do it in the early years. And one of the studies that has just came out that has had the biggest impact on me is something called the early catastrophe, the 30 million word gap by age 3. How many of you have seen this study? A number of you. Okay, well, what it says is it was done by the University of Kansas, and researchers went into the homes of 42 families from various socioeconomic backgrounds to assess the ways in which daily exchanges between a parent and child shape language and vocabulary development. And their findings were unprecedented and I think in many ways shocking. Differences in parent-child interactions produce significant discrepancies in not only the children's knowledge, but also their skills and experiences, with children from high-income families being exposed to 30 million more words than children from families on welfare. I mean, imagine 30 million more words. And follow-up studies show that these differences in language and interaction experiences have lasting effects on a child's performance in life. And a study by Robert Putnam, who we know well in New Hampshire, showed that parents with professional degrees annually delivered about 166,000 words of encouragement. He called them encouragements, and 26,000 discouragements. Working class parents delivered 62,000 encouragements and 36,000 discouragements, and parents on welfare delivered 26,000 encouragements and 57,000 discouragements. I think that shows us so dramatically why this is so important. This is something the business community recognizes. As governor, I recognized it, and we were able to expand public kindergarten with a lot of bipartisan support from people in this room. Governors who succeeded me continued that expansion of kindergarten and implementing it. And now we have this opportunity to go and look at the earlier years before kindergarten, because even that is almost too late. I just wanted to give you an update before I close on where we are in Washington, because we are, as I think most of you know, reforming No Child Left Behind, and we have a Senate version of legislation called the Every Child Achieves Act, and it does include important provisions to ensure that ESEA funds can be used for early education programs, and it also creates a new grant program that is specifically targeted at improving the quality of these programs. So it would ensure that funds from Title I, so programs to support disadvantaged students, Title II, programs to support teachers and school leaders, and Title III, which are programs serving English language learners, can be used to strengthen and expand early childhood education programs. So that's a really important development, I think, as we think about funding that will be available to help with early childhood programs. Now, unfortunately, we have a House that has not included that flexibility in their legislation, so we have to get some agreement, and we are just at the beginning of that process. But clearly, as all of the speakers have said, this is a bipartisan issue. We need to work together to get it done. And here in New Hampshire, over the next 6 months or so, we have a tremendous opportunity to talk to the candidates very directly about what their position is on this issue. And as Mark Shriver said so well, it's not enough to give lip service to the topic. Everybody now understands that this is important, hopefully, who's running for President of the United States. But we have also got to look at and to pin people down, our elected officials down, on what are they willing to do about it. What's the record been? How have they voted when the votes have come up? Have they been willing to put the resources into this issue? Have they been willing to support reforms to make sure that kids can get the education they need? And this is the opportunity that we have. I hope all of you here will take advantage of that opportunity and make sure that as you're going into the voting booth, as the last panel just said, that you know where they stand on early childhood education, and more importantly, what they're willing to do to make a difference for our kids. So thank you all very much for what you have done, and I look forward to continuing to work with you.
We've had the opportunity to hear from a lot of our policy leaders and folks who are true experts in this field of early learning. And our next messenger will come from the business community. As we know, and as we've reinforced through all of this coalition, this approach that's nonpartisan, bipartisan, that includes all of us, is so essential. And To come introduce that next speaker is someone who's a dear friend of mine and someone that I would be remiss if I didn't pause for 1 second and point out that there's another group that's incredibly important in this conversation. You and I know that all of us could scream from the mountaintops all that we have learned this morning and repeat it over and over again and probably only get so far. Social media is wonderful and all of our friends will hear us, but we can only take that message so far. We need our allies and our friends in the media to be able to do much of this as well. And so my friend Matt Mowry of Business New Hampshire Magazine is coming up to do the next introduction, but I would like a very loud round of applause because he's been an incredible ally in this effort in educating our public and helping us in this pursuit.
That is a very kind introduction for doing my job. Oh, and back in the days when I was blonde, blue-eyed, and skinny. So I got introduced to this as early childhood education as a business concept through Early Learning New Hampshire and Spark New Hampshire. And through them, I was able to attend Ready Nation Summit a couple of years ago in Georgia. And like this, it was chock full of experts and compelling information, and it just made business sense. And so we launched a series of articles about a year and a half ago that started off with our cover story on why babies matter to business. And it's been very widely received. But beyond the research that I was exposed to in doing these stories, I've been able to see the impact of development firsthand when my wife and I became foster parents to a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. And our 2-year-old over these past 2 years has gone from a child who did not laugh, who did not sing, and who would hit his head against a wall because that's how he dealt with being sad or frustrated, to now being a 4-year-old who laughs a lot, who sings a lot, including his ABCs, who counts proudly because his older brother can do it, and who's learning to express his emotions. And we went from having a 4-year-old who couldn't sit still for story time, and never mind other classroom activities, to becoming a sight word specialist in kindergarten, and to reading to me at night, and quite proudly kind of crushing it in 1st grade right now. And that was due not only to a stable and loving home that we were able to provide, but to a whole team of people that provided early interventions and early engagement in these children's life, from social workers to therapists to wonderful early childhood learning center and to great teachers. And when children receive all that early on, those great interventions and engagement, they are able to make dramatic and powerful connections. I learned that firsthand when we started broaching the subject of adoption with my oldest child. And I asked him, in trying to make sure he understood what we were doing, you know, if I'm going to be your daddy, and Lisa's going to become your mommy forever, what does that make you? And we were just looking for him to say son. But instead, my son looked at me, and he said, happy. Oh, it gets better. And I said, oh, bud, that makes me so happy too. I said, but do you know what else that makes you? And he looked at me again, and he said, loved. And that is the power of early intervention and engagement in a child's life. It's also why I am grateful for leaders like our next speaker, who are rallying support for early childhood education as a business issue and making us realize that this is important to us as a business community and to the future of our workforce pipeline. Our keynote speaker, John E. Pepper Jr., is co-chair of the Ready Nation CEO Task Force on Early Childhood. He is the former chairman and CEO of Procter & Gamble and the former chairman of the Walt Disney Company. He will talk to us today about why, in his retirement, His passion has become early childhood, so please join me in welcoming John Pepper to the stage.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. What a wonderful gathering this is. It has to give someone like myself, coming from Ohio and believing in this, such encouragement. But to see a coming together here of foundations, of endowments, of business community, and just so many of you in the room behind this critical imperative. I am, as Matt suggested, and thank you for the introduction, Matt, and what you're doing, I am one of 30 retired or current CEOs and one of 1,300 business leaders who are attached to Ready Nation. And you'll find on the table there some documents, and I would invite all of you from the business community who would be willing to sign up and become a member of Ready Nation as we take this message forward. In a sense, I felt as I came before you today that all of us here are really speaking on behalf of 7 to 8 million 3- and 4-year-olds across this country and some 20,000 3- and 4-year-olds in the state of New Hampshire who are not now receiving quality early childhood development, without which we know their life faces real limitations. I have come to see this imperative of early childhood education as the social and the moral and the economic imperative of our generation. We talk about a lot of deficits in this country today. We talk about job deficits, budget deficits, but there is one deficit that impacts all of the others, and it is the deficit in the early childhood development of our children, 0 to 5. It's a deficit compared to other countries. It's a deficit marked tremendously by racial and income disparities, as we all know. And it's a disparity that we not only know how to close, but we can close in a way financially that makes it, in business terms, an absolute no-brainer. I think we'd all agree from what we've heard this morning, anyone sitting here would simply wonder, when are you going to get it done? And I think the reaction would simply be, it is certainly mine, and I'm sure yours, let's just do it. Yes, thank you. Let's just do it. I first started to work on childhood education 30 years ago, mid-80s, working with Governor Voinovich and later Senator Voinovich on his education task force. We remain far from where we should be today. What makes this particularly concerning, really maddening as far as I'm concerned, is what we now know on the impact of early childhood development on a total life of a child. We know that there are critical gaps in the development of young adults today, and I won't go through them in any detail. We've heard about them from Pat and from the General. Our high school dropout rate is 20%. In major metro areas, it's 40 to 50%. This is at a time when 70% of all new jobs in the next 5 years are going to require more than a high school education, and yet we have 25 and 40% in some places dropouts. It's no wonder that today we have this terrible anomaly of having 10 million unemployed people and 4 million jobs that we cannot fill because we don't have a qualified person. The consequences of being a high school dropout are worse than ever. Unemployment in double digits, income, even if it's there, at a level that probably has you on food stamps. And it affects the next generation, and we can never forget this. Only 5% of the children of a high school dropout will go to college. 5% of a high school dropout will ever go to college. And I cannot get out of my mind the fact that 70% of the 2.3 million incarcerated men and women in this country, highest level of incarceration by a ratio of 4 to 1 On a per capita basis versus any other country in the world, 70% of those men and women are high school dropouts. This, ladies and gentlemen, is tragedy of the greatest order. As we've all heard and we all know, the root causes of high school dropouts go way back. They go back to the question of whether a child's ready for kindergarten. And less than half of the children in this country today are ready to go to kindergarten. That's a fact. On learning proficiency, we heard again today that on testing, our children are in the bottom half, perhaps in the top of the bottom third, across to other developing countries. But this is something I didn't know until recently. If you break the children down into two groups, one group being school districts where 75% or more are on a subsidized lunch program, in those schools, we are the worst country in the world among 24 and 25 developing countries. And yes, you take the other side, school districts where less than 10% of the children are on subsidized lunch programs, and we are the highest of the country. The ravage of poverty has to be addressed, and early childhood education is the path to do it. It goes on. Just one generation, we were the #1 country in the world in the percentage of our young adults who have been to college. Does anyone know where we are now? We're number 12. In one generation, we have slipped from #1 to number 12. The sad fact, the bottom line fact is that 25 to 30%, we don't know exactly, but a substantial number of our young people today are not job ready, they're not career ready, and most importantly, perhaps, they're not life ready. They're not life ready. We all know it doesn't have to be this way. We've heard major reasons why it doesn't have to be this way this morning, and we cannot allow it to remain this way. Not if we're going to be the community, the state, or the nation that we strive and know we need and can be. It's been exciting, truly exciting, what we've learned in the past 10 years, much of it revealed here this morning. What does it start with? The fact that, yes, 90% of the brain develops during those 5 years. I've been saying that fact for probably 5 years, but little understanding that I have about what that really, really means. And I won't repeat what we've seen here today. I will say I saw Pat's presentation in New York on Friday, and I was with my 26-month-old grandson in Norwich, Vermont over the weekend. And I think I tried at least to interact with Bo in a different way than I would have if I hadn't seen Pat's presentation on Friday. I was doing a better job of pointing, drawing him out. What color is this? This is irrefutable science, absolutely irrefutable science, and we must act on it. Of greatest importance to somebody like me, who's grown up trying to connect data to see cause and effect, one thing leads to another, has been the irrefutable development of evidence now, and you all know it, over the last, really, I'd say 10 years convincingly, though we have old studies going back to '68, how it all connects. And how that kindergarten readiness score equates to third grade reading proficiency, how that relates to dropout rate, and how that relates to everything else. We've been lucky down in Southwest Ohio. 10 years ago, we started under this United Way Strive program, a very high quality early childhood education program. And we now can know that of the children ready for kindergarten, okay, if they're ready for kindergarten, 86% of them are reading on grade at the end of the third grade. Those that were not ready for kindergarten, that same number, 86, becomes 59. That's almost a 30-point delta. You just don't see many of them in business, right? I mean, that is something you look at and you say, you take action. Almost the same results are available coming out of San Francisco. Very similar results coming out of Maryland. Extraordinary consistency in being ready for kindergarten to third grade reading. And why does that matter? Well, most of you know, Children not reading proficiently at the end of the 3rd grade is 4 times more likely to drop out. And if they're poor and living in a poor neighborhood, they're 11 to 17 times more likely to drop out of high school than if they were reading proficiently. Now, when I heard this, I had a nagging worry, and it was, what about poverty? Even in a poor situation, will a child be able to do it? So I would like to tell you a quick story of my contact with the maps. I asked for 2 maps to be put together about Cincinnati neighborhoods. One map profiled area by area income, and the other kindergarten readiness scores. And I put them on top of each other. What I found was exactly what you'd expect, an almost perfect correlation. Higher income, higher readiness scores. Lower income, lower readiness scores. However, there were 3 pockets, communities within Cincinnati that I immediately saw that while in the very poorest area, they had kindergarten readiness scores equal to our highest income area. Well, that got me interested. I guess my curiosity was piqued. And I went out to see the first of them. It was in Winton Woods, government housing. And what did I find? I found a quality preschool where the kids were so raptured in interaction with the teacher, they didn't even know I walked in the room. I found not only that this preschool was attached to the early childhood, so that the 0 to 3 was being mapped correctly in. I found they were working directly with the kindergarten, so that that passage would be good. I found that they were hooked up with a food bank, and that they had health people coming in to check with the kids. I saw a holistic, community-centered activity, and those children coming from the poorest area were as ready to go to kindergarten, and I found out then from the school how they were doing as they went through, and they were up there right at the top. There are a number of reasons why business people like me care about this, beyond, I would say, the social and moral development that it means, though that's all important. One is we become paranoid when we see somebody else doing something better than we are. And we think it's important. And I think paranoid is the word. That is how we feel. And we see that happening right now all around the world. If we were in Frankfurt, Germany today, and I was talking to that audience, or in Paris, France, I would be telling them that 90% of the 4-year-olds are in quality pre-K. China has made the commitment to have 70% of all of its children go to not 1, not 2, but 3 years of preschool by the year 2020. And you know, they've got the money to do it. And they probably have more of a command structure when it comes to legislatures than we do in this country. But folks, this is happening around us, and we're falling behind in other areas. This is nuts. We've learned something else, and there's been several references to it today, and yes, it's the economics. If you didn't care about anything else, and all you cared about was the financial future, you'd do this. You've heard the numbers. I've studied dozens of these analyses over the past 10 years. They go from 2 to 1, if you've heard, and I think that's a real safe number, and I'll take a 2 to 1 return every day of the week in business. And they go up to 7 to 1, and they go up to 17 to 1. And you saw the chart from the senator. This chart, linking how much you spend 90% after it's over. This drives people in business nuts. I mean, this doesn't make any sense. And it isn't like we need to go from 5% to 10%. We don't. I've had people, in light of all these facts, question may be on some of your mind today, it wouldn't surprise me, is why with all of this is it taking us so long to get to quality pre-K and what surrounds it? Well, I think there are at least 3 reasons. One, substantively, is a lot of the knowledge we're talking about wasn't here 10 years ago. Or let me put it this way. It's been amplified in ways that we've seen today, in ways that simply weren't there before, and it's taking us time to get it out. The second, and I think, Mark, you mentioned this, The voice of the people who most will benefit from this in terms of at least the income, they're faint voices. They don't lobby. Kids don't lobby. A lot of the moms don't lobby. And another reason is it costs money, and I'll come back to that. But another is that we'll hear comments sometimes about fade out. I've had this brought up to me with a lot of people. Some of you probably have. Oh, we hear it's good, but it all fades out by the third grade. And there have been some studies, usually attached to a poor quality pre-K, or maybe terrible continuity afterwards, that show that. But don't make any mistake. The overwhelming majorities of studies that have been done on this, recent ones like in Tulsa, New Jersey, going back to 1998, good studies. The ones in Cincinnati, the ones in San Francisco and Maryland, they show that there are indeed cognitive benefits that last. But what's been missed by so many are the executive functions that come from this. What we've heard of is the social and emotional benefits. Let me tell you a quick story on that point. I happened to be in a museum, outside a museum in Cincinnati, about 6 months ago, and there were probably about 25 young kids there. They were kindergartens. They were all kindergartners. And then their teachers were there, 4 or 5 teachers, and the teachers were at one table. And I went to the teachers and I said, looking at the group of kids, did any of your kindergartners go to pre-K? And they talked around for a few seconds and came up, yeah, 4 or 5 out of the 20. So of course, I asked them, do you see any difference in those 4 to 5 who went to pre-K? Oh, Mr. Pepper, we see an enormous difference. I said, what is the difference? It was not what I would have expected, though it would after hearing Pat and Ellen. It was not that they would read more letters or count more numbers. No, it was that they were willing to share, that they were staying on task, that they'd learned to come out of the home and come back and with the sense that they weren't being lost. Experts agree on this. We couldn't have had it presented in a more compelling way, in my view, than we had this morning from these wonderful leaders in this field. This is why these studies over 20-plus years show these huge benefits that show up in employment, family formation, health, income, all the rest that comes from what we want for all our children. Healthy development, lead a good life. Is quality pre-K a magic bullet? No, not in my view, there aren't any. I think it has to be especially emphasized again and again, the element of quality in the interaction. But I also think we need, particularly with families that are poor, to bring that holistic community around it for health, maybe for food on the table, for job development, whatever it might be. I liken quality pre-K, if I might, it's like a vaccine. It's not been proven to be a total or a universal cure, but we do know that it makes a life-changing difference in the lives of countless people and children. What's more, this vaccine pays out. You give this vaccine and you actually save money. And yet, unaccountably today, we are only giving this vaccine to about 25% of the young 3- and 4-year-olds in this country. We are failing to act on the truth, and to me, that borders on being criminal. Doing so will require more money. However, not only will this investment come back 2 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1, we ought to keep the amount of money in perspective. The total amount of money needed to provide quality pre-K to every 3- and 4-year-old in this nation is about 5% of our total defense budget. To every 3- and 4-year-old, about 5%. And even more pointedly, perhaps, the cost of providing quality development experience to over 5 million 4-year-olds is what is spent today on incarcerating 2.3 million men and women each year. Ladies and gentlemen, let me sum it up. We need to act on what we know to be true. We need to act on what we have learned if we are to be the nation, the state, the community, the city that we aspire to be. socially, morally, and economically. I choose the word morally intentionally. I do not see how we can any longer honor this sober promise of our Declaration of Independence if we do not now honor what we know to be true. We hold these truths to be self-evident, it is written, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As we all know, we've interpreted what that really means and calls on us to do differently over the years. I believe we've reached the point of knowledge and experience to assert that it is the inalienable right of every child to have the quality learning experience during the most important stage of their life that provides them with a chance, a fair chance, to be all they can be. Thank you. Thank you. I will close my remarks with some good news and a challenge. The good news is that the public gets it. Poll after poll is showing that 70% of men and women of all parties, and a majority, will support public funding for quality pre-K. And yes, as we've heard, the coverage is expanding, albeit far too slowly. Governors from over 30 states, red and blue, have increased or advocated for higher spending. I'm so happy to see an increasing number of cities, most recently New York City, 65,000 young people in quality pre-K, it must be quality, this year. We've seen Denver renew a ballot initiative, started in 2006, renewed it this year to provide it for 4-year-olds and moving on to 3-year-olds. San Antonio, and my town, my city of Cincinnati, is committed to have a ballot initiative in November 2016, which, when passed, will provide quality pre-K to every 3- and 4-year-olds in Cincinnati. That's 5,000 more than receive it today. Yes, there is momentum. There is momentum. And I've reached a point now where I know this will happen. The evidence is so irrefutable. There are only 2 issues. One is quality. It has to be quality. Without that, it won't work. And the second is we've got to get on with it. And I think we have to look at this very concretely. For every year we fail to do this is another cohort of 3- and 4-year-olds who we have failed to do what we know can make a difference to them, to our country, to our city, and economically valid. The time to do that is here in New Hampshire and across the country. You've heard the call, which I think is absolutely right, in talking to legislators. Ask them where they stand and tell them they won't have your support unless they support this issue. That's an easy call to make. I'd also urge that you look for opportunities to make this happen on a universal basis in a town or two, a city or two. It may happen in Manchester before it happens across the whole state. But there's nothing more valuable than getting an island, a demonstration in a particular state to have the rest of the state get on board. And with 400 different municipalities, there have got to be a lot of opportunities to actually make it happen sooner rather than later. Theodore Roosevelt said something on October the 12th, 1912, at Madison Square Garden that I will close with and that inspires me and I offer to you today. He said, "Perhaps once in a generation there comes a chance for people of a country to play their part wisely and fearlessly in some great battle of the age-long warfare for human rights. We know there are in life injustices which we are powerless to remedy, but we also know that there is much injustice which can be remedied. We propose to lift the burdens from the poor. We propose to stand for the sacred rights of childhood." Close quote. That is what we're talking about today. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask, and I'm so encouraged to see you all here, that we join together to provide the same opportunity to all children, that we would spend the last ounce of our money and give the last ounce of our effort to to provide to our own children and to our own grandchildren. Thank you very much. God bless you all. Thank you.
So the wrap up and next steps. Mark, when you were talking about it, really it can make a big difference when you just make a few phone calls. It reminded me of this spring when Representative Mary Jane Wallner gave a call. She sits on the House Finance Committee and said they're thinking about charging $50 per child to be licensed as a child care center. Do the math on that. That was about $2.5 million that would have come out of child care programs if that had happened. So she called Katie Brissett, our deputy director. We found out where these representatives lived. We found child care or Head Start or preschool programs in their communities, and those directors made calls and they took it off the table. So I just say it really does make a difference. So one thing I really want make sure you see, the My Commitment form in your packet. We really hope that you are able to take specific action. It'll be different of what you think you can do. You might host a regional breakfast, or you're at the Rotary Club and you want us to come, or somebody to come to talk about early childhood development, to share some of the science. Behind me on the stage are these bedrock banners. Children are the bedrock of the Granite State. Pat Cantor is here, and she's the one who thought of that. And so we've really been talking about that throughout the state. And so know that Spark New Hampshire, the Governor's Council on Early Childhood, can arrange a presentation with you. There's some terrific videos, terrific presentations, beautifully produced. We'll come and do that for you in your communities. You'll also see on here Vroom. You heard about Vroom. We're really excited about bringing Vroom to communities, to Mind in the Making, to have them hear about this, building essential life skills. So again, whatever you think you can do, please do. The other thing is on the back is a pledge. If you do take the pledge and sign your name or put your name down, your name will go up on the Spark website. Please do that. So right now we're going to show a very short video. We talked about Early Learning Nation 2025. What you're going to see is it's a little bit graphic in the sense that you're going to see some pretty sad situations, some children that are facing some real adversity in their life. But that's really the way it is for too many children today. You're then going to see from the voices of the same children what it could look like if we do take action, if we do invest in early learning programs. And you'll see here some examples of innovation here on your commitment form of terrific things that can make a big difference. Our Race to the Top grant. New Hampshire didn't get it, this federal grant. We lost about $36 million because we have taken money out of programs for young children instead of investing it. We tried again with Mary Erick to get a preschool development grant, another $30-some million that could have come to our state. Taxpayer money that we've already paid, our taxpayers have paid it. We couldn't get it because we've taken money out of young children's programs and services, and we wouldn't promise to put it back. We're the only New England state that didn't get one or the other. So we can do better, and I hope we will. And here's change the first 5 years, and you change everything. Thank you.
That's me at 4 months old. I'm one of the thousands of little miracles born into poverty every day. She's 17 and never finished high school. She's got some big dreams for me, but she's alone and she's scared. This is my first birthday. That's my grandma, Tanya, and her boyfriend, Kevin. We all live together. It's cold and crowded. I hope we move soon. I don't like Kevin. He's always yelling. This is my second day. We're all at daycare, strapped in, watching TV again. I wish I could just run around. This is my third birthday. My brother William's taking care of me while my mom sleeps. She works the night shift, so we can't turn up the TV, but we get to go to bed whenever we want. 4th birthday. We're sleeping at my aunt's this month. Dad's coming home, but I'm hungry and I miss him. This birthday. This is my first day of kindergarten. I'm tired. I'm hungry. I'm unprepared because I didn't get the right start. I'm twice as likely to be in special education. 30% more likely to never go to college. 70% more likely to be arrested for a violent crime. Become a teen parent. Drop out of school. Never hold a job. Spend life in poverty. My mom plays with me all the time. She smiles a lot now, and she knows I'm not alone anymore. Grandma, Tanya, and Kevin read me a story every night before I go to bed. I go to my school every day, where I get to run and play. My new Will and I go to preschool together. Today we learned about dinosaurs and played a counting game. Every morning, brush our teeth and eat breakfast together. We have our own place now. None will always be together. This is my first day of kindergarten. I'm rested, I'm eager, I'm curious. I'm prepared. I'm ready. I am your future. Change the first 5 years, and you change everything. Anyone investing?
Obviously, the morning we've about trying to find ways to work together to elevate this issue and to try to make this a national dialogue. And fortunately, already we have a wonderful opportunity to do just exactly that and lift early learning as a conversation to a national platform. We're able to do that this afternoon with a former First Lady, a former United States Senator from New York, a former United States Secretary of State. It is my pleasure, along with ABC's Cokie Roberts, to introduce someone with whom I find quite personably likable, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
Welcome. We've had a fabulous morning here where we've seen 3 million adorable baby pictures. You crowd up there. Yes, they had one of me too. And I should say at the beginning, all of the candidates of both parties were invited to here today. Secretary Clinton is here. To begin, would you like to reprise Bartender Val?
Well, yes, I'll even sing. I will spare you that. Yeah, we had a great time. I mean, it is if you ever get a chance to do anything like that. Had a great time. This young woman, Kate McKinnon, who's now playing me. It's a little bit odd to see yourself being played, and especially when, you know, they do things like laugh really heartily and you go, oh, do I really do that? Yes, you do. And so it was great. We had a good time. And, you know, hopefully, you know, I'll get to, you know, get back, as they say.
And my capacity as a trustee of childhood education, I will not ask you about emails.
That's fine.
But this is a subject you've been involved in for decades. Right. As people always say, for broadcasting. Struggling with here this morning is that everybody here has been involved in this issue. Right. What takes it to the next place where people actually pay attention and get it done? These
is looking at, I know you've had the chance to hear about the latest brain research. I know Dr. Kuhl presented, and a lot of the work that she's done for years, but others as well, has been so compelling. Every small child, a good start in the first 5 years of life, didn't have what we now have in terms of the compelling evidence about what a difference it does make. The board. So the first thing is what you're doing here is really important, but please take the message and keep talking, because the economic case may make the difference in people's one little thing to it to make this case. The economic case has been made by a number of people. One who's made it compellingly is Dr. James Heckman, the Nobel Prize winning economist from Chicago. That the single best investment any nation can make is in early childhood education, quality early childhood education. I want to stress that because, you know, sometimes studies, they say, well, you know, just draw the conclusion that any early childhood program will be successful. But if they are quality driven, if they have, you know, the experienced staff who are, you know, both well educated and well trained, you all know that better than anybody. Well, I think Dr. received that the Chinese have just hired him to advise the Chinese government on putting together a universal pre-kindergarten program, because two years ago, right after I got out of being Secretary of State, and we did an event in Washington where she basically said the Chinese government is now turning their attention to early childhood education because they know they've got to emphasize poverty. So I think viewing it as a competitive necessity and a potential advantage with economic consequences to our standing in the world is the next. It's good for kids and it's good for families. All of that is true, but we need to go one step further.
Well, we heard a compelling case along those lines from Mr. Pepper. About these studies, and there was just one out from Tennessee that did and a similar one there on Head Start, and it led one of the state legislators to say it's like paying $1,000 for a hamburger because doesn't seem to be working very well. But that's
Noticed today in the New York Times, David Kerp, who has written and studied this issue for many years now and is at the University of California, works, and comparing it actually to the programs in Massachusetts, Boston in particular, where the quality does pay off. Now, I will quickly add the home instruction program for preschool youngsters 25 years ago, because I was looking for something that would help better prepare kids to might not even have a high school education. And I looked all over the place, and I found this program in Israel, and I called up the woman who had designed it. And why did they design it? Because they had a big flood of many from North Africa. System, and they still weren't successful. And so all of a sudden, being curious about this, was the family. I mean, that's so obvious. The family was not supportive of education, in part because they themselves had not been in their prior. Five years later now, it's a peer-reviewed program that produces positive results for two reasons. One, is reflected in the support she then gives for the child's education. And secondly, the children, you can even compare in the same family, who go through the program recent studies of Head Start, again, show that when done properly, it does have lasting impact. Generally viewed as positive, because the family's the first school, the parents are the first teacher, parents. The final thing I want to say about this, when I was at the Clinton Foundation before leaving to do my run for president, we started a program older siblings to talk to babies, to read to babies, to sing to babies. And it's, I feel about because in schools. So when we talk about early childhood, I like to think about the various different approaches is sort of the lesson, but if you do it right, it'll make a big difference, and it sure is a better investment than trying to make up for it across our country. But then there are things you can do even before a child is in some kind of formal learning setting.
Well, in fact, it's labor intensive, it's not for room of trying to get to more moms, masses of people.
Go to scale is absolutely essential. That So in addition to reminding parents, don't forget that well child checkup, or, when your child starts to talk, because what I found I've been doing, as Koki said, I've been doing this work for a really long time. You can still, as I found when we started you get a blank stare, or even in my case, you get, well, why would I talk to her? She can't talk back. The more we can use technology, the more we can send messages. Don't forget SMS. Have to organize ourselves more to deliver those messages, and then where we can do the follow-up.
Presidential campaign. It's
Well, I am talking about it in my campaign. My struggle is to get the press to cover. Class, you have to talk about education. So obviously, elementary and secondary education. And just keep trying to raise that. And I must say, it's be competitiveness around the world, and whether or not we are adequately preparing our youngest children. Or even, but there is no getting around the fact that those first important foundation. People who are better stimulated, talk. One of the things we did with the Too Small to Fail, their children to succeed. Heads nodding for people who've worked in bilingual communities. World. So we put that message on Univision, and a lot of the break this down, all the different messages that go to
bilingual abilities actually say you talk about it, but how do you get into
So many of you have been doing for so long. You know, human rights are women's rights are human. Property for the first time. But we didn't really make progress. Economy. They were working double time. Secretary of State, I said, look, we got to figure out about women. International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, others have made example. The same argument about her. Owe it to every kid. About why it does. Academic skills. That's what so yeah. Possible
that on an sounds to be
as you can start keep learning. We can't work for people flex face. fair to we're going to we've got exists